Chapter 422. Hearing Zhu Luo's words, Chen Changsheng subconsciously turned his head to look at Su Li and the assassin called Lu Qing. After leaving the military stronghold on the border and meeting outside the forest, he was keenly aware that this terrifying assassin ranked third in the world had always been following him, Su Li, in secret. This made him very uneasy, and the mental pressure was enormous. There were even times when he felt like he could not endure it any longer. Only at that moment, when he saw the smiles on the faces of Su Li and this assassin in the rain, and then saw the assassin's sword pierce through Zhu Luo's illusion like a branch piercing through the moon in a pond, did he realize to his shock that this assassin had followed him and Su Li for so many days without attacking. It was not because of a terrifying forbearance and patience, nor was it because he was searching for a better opportunity to attack. Rather, it was because he had always been protecting Su Li, waiting for the most dangerous moment to appear. Lu Qing actually knew the Sword of the Golden Crow. It must be known that the Sword of the Golden Crow was a secret technique created by Su Li himself. From this, it could be seen that the relationship between him and Su Li was inevitably extremely close. In this way, tonight in Xuanyang City truly was a trap. However, this was not a trap of the Great Zhou Imperial Court and the Orthodoxy, but a trap of Mount Li, a trap of Su Li and that assassin. This was Chen Changsheng's current thought, the same as Zhu Luo and the others in the drizzle. But Lu Qing did not admit it, even though his golden crow sword was so dazzling and there were still burning embers dancing in the rain. He knew the sword of Mount Li, but he was not a person of Mount Li. Chen Changsheng didn't know why, but this unconvincing excuse made Chen Changsheng believe him. Zhu Luo naturally wouldn't believe it. He had his own judgment, but he didn't have the time or the need to find out the truth behind this matter. Zhu Luo gazed at Su Li, his expression cold and detached, but the moonlight in his eyes seemed about to ignite. He had come to Xuanyang City today precisely to kill this person. In the past, even if he was one of the storms of the Eight Directions, he would not have dared to say that he had a chance of defeating Su Li, but the entire continent knew that Su Li had been heavily injured when breaking through the encirclement of the demons. He had originally believed that killing Su Li would be a very simple matter, not even requiring him to personally act. But now, it seemed that even if he personally took action, he might not succeed. He was even seriously injured. A person like Su Li was truly very difficult to kill. Similarly, although he was heavily injured, it was very difficult to kill him. In the heavy rain, Wang Pe, Lu Qing, and Chen Changsheng's response could be said to be the toughest, most intelligent, and could even be said to be perfect. They had inconceivably heavily injured Zhu Luo, but had no way of making him die or admit defeat. I did miscalculate some things. Separated by the countless fine curtains woven from the drizzle, Zhu Luo looked at Su Li and said, "Everyone knows that you seem to be carefree and casual, playing around with the world, but in reality, you are proud and aloof, with no friends in the world, and it is impossible for Mount Li to send anyone to help you. But I didn't think that there would actually be someone willing to help a cold-blooded person like you." These words were naturally referring to Wang Pe, Chen Changsheng, and Lu Qing, especially the first two. Whether it was in terms of temperament or anything else, they were extremely different from Su Li. Their way of doing things and the goodwill they maintained towards the world were what Su Li had always despised and ridiculed the most. However, Chen Changsheng did not abandon him, and Wang Pe traveled 1,000 li just to help him. It was as if they wanted to tell Su Li, this lonely star that had killed countless people, that this world was not always ice cold, and that there were always some people that were worth trusting. But you should be very clear that they can't save you. Zhu Luo glanced at the yellow paper umbrella in Su Li's hand and continued, "It's impossible for you to survive today. Your struggles are futile, only delaying for time." Su Li calmly looked at him, not saying anything. It was unknown whether it was because of disdain or some other reason. "You delayed until Wang Pe unsheathed his blade, delayed until that assassin unsheathed his sword, but so what?" Zhu Luo pointed at the surrounding city that was as dark as night and the wilderness further away, saying, Look at this world. There's only a fool, a young man, and a ghost that can't see the light in front of you, but we're the whole world." As he said these words, the soles of his shoes gradually left the water, and his body floated into the rainy sky. His long hair danced in the wind, and a tyrannical chi enveloped all of Xuanyang City. Blood flowed from his chest and the space between his thumb and forefinger. Falling to the ground, Tenna jong away with a light pitter-patter. The drizzle finally stopped, and the clouds split apart once more, revealing a sky that might or might not be real, but it seemed to have a moon. Countless sword intents descended like moonlight. The moonlight rippled like water and flowed on the street. Countless bottomless cracks appeared on the hard surface of the street. These were all sword slashes. This was the result of an expert of the divine domain releasing his chi with all his strength. Zhu Luo was determined to use his most powerful attack. Wang Pa suddenly said, "Senior, you don't even mind paying 200 years of your lifespan?" Zhu Luo was already heavily injured. If he wanted to kill Su Li without the slightest mishap, he would have to pay an even greater price. He looked at Wang Pa and said, "Brat of the Wang clan, didn't you also pay 20 years of your lifespan?" Previously in the inn, Wang Pa had heavily injured painted armor Xiao Zhang and Liang Wang's son with a single blade. It must be known that although he was ranked at the top of the Proclamation of Liberation, in reality, the three of them were very close in strength. He was fighting one against two and wanted to make them lose their ability to fight in the shortest amount of time. Naturally, he had to use an extremely powerful secret technique that could even damage himself. For Wang Pa to do this, he had paid a great price. At the time, Xiao Zhang and Liang Wang's son had been extremely shocked. Now that he had asked Zhu Luo had returned the question to him. Wang Po's eyebrows had been washed by the rain, making them even fainter and droopier. His clothes had been soaked by the rain, making him look even more wretched. If he were an accountant, the master he worked for would definitely have already gone bankrupt. But his words were still calm and forceful. "I'm still young, but senior, you are already old." Time was both the fairest and the most unfair. Age was Wang Po's greatest advantage over Zhu Luo. Su Li, who had remained silent all this time, suddenly began to laugh. His laughter contained boundless joy. Then he said to Wang Pa, "Those old things can only die of old age. They cannot be defeated. There's no need for you to advise him." Wang Pa understood, as did the people on the rainy street. If Zhu Luo retreated tonight, how could he maintain his divine status on the continent? How could he still consider himself one of the storms of the eight directions? Since he was one of the storms of the eight directions, he could not be defeated. He could only win, even if he had to pay 200 years. Su Li's laughter reverberated through the quiet Xuanyang City, brimming with ridicule at the so-called prestige and the continuation of the clan. Zhu Luo suddenly turned to the night sky, a mocking smile appearing on his lips. Su Li's smile suddenly vanished. Zhu Luo looked at him and mocked. "Have you never thought that since we've decided to kill you, could it be that only one old thing like me will come? You've stalled for time, and in the end, you've still dragged yourself into the abyss. Do you regret it?" The rain in Xuanyang City had already stopped, and the clouds in the sky had gradually dispersed. However, it was still gloomy and gloomy. Half of the sky seemed to have a moon, faintly discernible in the clouds. In the other half of the sky, countless bright stars suddenly appeared. Qin Changsheng did not know what had happened. Gazing at that starry sky, he realized that his fated star was not among them. He vaguely understood that those stars were actually all illusions. Who had come? Who could actually make the world give birth to such a strange phenomenon? Wang Po's expression became abnormally solemn. Lu Qing stood in front of Su Li's horse, his head lowered, blood dripping from his face. It was hard to tell what he was thinking. Whispers could be heard from the distant streets, occasionally interspersed with a few cries of surprise. Even Liang Wang's son and Shui, he had rather strange expressions. They had not expected that such a large contingent would appear tonight. Hua Jiefu's complexion paled slightly as he thought what to do. A person had come to Xuanyang City. He had not yet appeared, but a sea of stars had appeared in the sky. A powerful spiritual sense gradually descended, and the puddles of water on the street were jolted into the air as if they were boiling. This person was called Guan Xinka. He lived by the sea or in the great western continent, gazing at the stars every night for more than 300 years. This person was very close to Zhu Luo and was known as the peerless star and moon. Of course, he was also a member of the storms of the 8 directions. Xuanyang City was quiet. Wang Pa turned to Chen Changsheng and said, "You should leave." Chen Changsheng's hand, gripping his sword, slightly trembled as he asked, "What about you?" Wang Pa thought it over, then said, "I want to try again." He knew that it was impossible, but he still wanted to do it. He knew that he was no match, but he still wanted to fight. Wang Pa had been an accountant for the Wenshui Tangs for 3 years, and he had not made a single mistake. He had always done what he said. He believed that Su Li should not have died tonight, so he would fight to the end. But he believed that there was no need for Chen Changsheng to stay here, because Chen Changsheng was only a youth. He still had a lot of his youth to waste, to experience. Chen Changsheng very seriously thought it over, but he still did not decide whether or not to leave. Today's rain was rather cold. Zhu Luo's sword was very cold, but his blood was still hot. In the end, he made his decision. But everyone knew that his decision, and even Wang Po's decision, no longer had any meaning. Wang Po, Chen Changsheng, and Lu Qing had forced Zhu Luo to this extent, which was already enough for them to be proud of. Moreover, this battle in the rain would assuredly be recorded in the annals of history, but they could do nothing more. 2 experts of the divine domain had simultaneously descended upon Xuanyang City. This was a sight that had not occurred in many years. Many people subconsciously turned to Su Li. Those 2 experts of the divine domain had come precisely for this person. Suddenly, those people that wanted to kill Su Li felt reverence and envy. The demons had schemed and schemed for many years, mobilizing all their experts and encircling the snowy plains. He was heavily injured, so if the human world wanted to kill him, they would need to mobilize their 2 most powerful figures. This sort of life was truly worthy of pride, glorious, and could be said to have no regrets. Everyone wanted to know just what a person like Su Li would say in the final moments of his life. Under the attentive gazes of countless people, Su Li finally spoke. He looked at Zhu Luo floating in the sky and said, "Can you wait a little longer?" This was very much like a crosstalk, and it was still a monologue. Zhu Luo slightly arched his brows and said, "To still want to delay at a time like this is somewhat unbefitting of your status. Could it be that a person like Mount Li's junior martial uncle would also fear the sea of stars after death?" "Correct. I'm delaying." Su Li's voice was very calm. "From a military fort to Xuanyang City, I've always been delaying because he lives rather far away, so it will take a very long time for him to get here." Zhu Luo asked, "You've always been waiting for someone?" Su Li replied, "Correct." Zhu Luo asked, "Not Lu Qing?" Su Li replied, "He's always been following me, so why would I be waiting? And I thought that he had come to kill me." Chen Changxing couldn't help but glance at Lu Qing, thinking, just what is the relationship between this famous assassin and Su Li? After a moment of silence, Zhu Luo asked, "Then who are you waiting for?" Su Li replied, "I'm waiting for a friend." Zhu Luo mocked, "Could it be that you also have a friend?" If this question were asked to a normal person, it would seem very absurd. People lived in this world and ate the 5 grains, fresh vegetables, and fruits. Who didn't have a friend? Whether it was a fair-weather friend or a friend of a brothel willow. In short, they were all friends. But this question was asked to Su Li, so it was not absurd. The entire continent knew that Su Li never trusted anyone and had no friends. Even Chen Changxing knew that he had no friends. The disciples of Mount Li were his disciples, even his family, but they were not his friends. Wang Po was not his friend, Chen Changxing was not, and Lu Qing was very clearly not. To be more precise, there were many people in this world who worshipped Su Li, but there were very few people who were qualified to be his friends. And those people, in Su Li's view, were all old things, rotten wood, old bastards. Like Zhu Luo, like Guan Xinka, who was about to arrive. Zhu Luo, was extremely confident that of those people who were qualified to be Su Li's friends, the only 10-odd people in the entire continent who had the ability to change today's situation, none of them were Su Li's friends. An even colder truth was that the majority of the 10-odd people in the world were Su Li's enemies. Zhu Luo did not understand just who Su Li was waiting for. If his friend was a farmer, then this friendship was very legendary, very aesthetically pleasing, but what meaning did that have? If even someone like you has friends, how can someone as outstanding as me not have friends? Su Li looked at Zhu Luo and jeered. Idiot! As his voice fell, the sea of stars over Xuanyang City suddenly began to tremble. A dignified and holy qi, even somewhat divine, blocked all the pressure from that sea of stars. Then, a person came from the south. It was an old friend of Su Li's. That person's white clothes fluttered in the wind. In an instant, she had flown 10-some li from the plains outside the city to Xuanyang City. That person was a woman, dressed in a white ceremonial robe. The dust of 10,000 li was all on her sleeves, and her white clothes were already gradually becoming dirty. She rushed in front of Zhu Luo. Zhu Luo let out a cry of extreme shock, then slashed out with his sword. The white-clothed woman raised her hand and lightly waved her sleeve. With this wave, the clouds in the sky began to terrifyingly twist. The dirty clothes covered the moon. The moonlight suddenly receded. Then Zhu Luo retreated, swiftly retreated, retreating 10-some li until he finally crashed against the city gate. With a massive boom, dust flew everywhere. Ever since Chun Changsheng had yelled out that Su Li was here, the city gate of Xuanyang City had remained tightly shut. At this moment, the city gate of Xuanyang City finally opened. The city gate directly collapsed. The ground was covered in wooden bricks. Zhu Luo knelt in the middle, constantly vomiting blood. On the street, the white-clothed woman slowly drew back her finger and turned her head to look at Su Li. This was a woman with an ordinary appearance, but the faint traces of time could be faintly seen on her face, just like the lines at the corners of her lips. Qin Changsheng felt that the white ceremonial robe was rather familiar. The crowd gaped in shock, not knowing what to say. Hua Jiefu led the priests of Xuanyang City to kneel and pay their respects, trembling in fear, not daring to speak. The white-clothed woman turned a blind eye to them, only calmly gazing at Su Li. Smiling, she asked, "Just a friend? Slightly handsome." Chapter 423. The white-clothed woman's smile was very faint, like the clouds, very clear, like water. But there were 10,000 emotions. There was reminiscence, there was teasing, and there was a sense of disappointment and frustration that was hidden the deepest, but could never be hidden. To have a friend come from afar, it should have been a joyous occasion, much less to say that at the most dangerous moment, she was helping him take care of his most dangerous enemy. However, Su Li's expression was rather distressed. Perhaps it was because the white-clothed woman had softly asked this question with a smile. The clouds once more obscured the moonlight and starlight in the sky. The streets once more dimmed, and more drops of rain began to fall. In the drizzle, he and the white-clothed woman faced each other in silence. But at this moment, the battle was actually still continuing. The clouds incessantly twisted and roiled, as if there were countless bolts of lightning within. That divine and dignified qi was like a rosy cloud chasing the moon, enveloping the moonlight. It incessantly pressed down, pursued, and, at the same time, pressed down on that distant star in the sky. The invisible lightning finally broke through the clouds, sending down countless bright bolts of lightning. Rumble. Thunder incessantly exploded over Xuanyang City, shaking the heavens and the earth. Who knew how many ordinary people hiding under their beds were shaken to the core, and who knew how many ignorant children began to loudly weep in fear. The clouds tore even more fiercely, as if the sky itself was about to split apart. The cultivators on the distant streets, as long as they had a slightly weaker cultivation, were immediately knocked unconscious by these thunderous booms. This was a battle between experts of the divine domain. This was a clash of strength at the highest level of the world. The white-clothed woman had her back to the sky. She paid no attention to that battle behind the clouds that had already surpassed the limits of the imagination of ordinary people. She only calmly gazed at Su Li in front of her. The world was filled with thunder and lightning, and the rumbling never ceased. The two still faced each other in silence. After some time, the thunder and lightning finally stopped, and Xuanyang City returned to true peace. The clouds gradually grew still, leaving behind only countless fine lines that looked like fish scales. These were the remnants of a clash of strength. Countless cracks appeared on the street behind the white-clothed woman, as if it was a field that had been plowed countless times. Countless strands of steam rose from those cracks. Just how deep were those cracks? Could it be that they had already reached the underground magma? Victory and defeat had been decided. In reality, the moment the white-clothed woman arrived in Xuanyang City, the outcome of this battle had already been decided. Everyone looked at the white-robed woman with extreme shock. In Chen Changsheng's heart, besides shock, he was even more perplexed. For some reason, he felt that the white robe she was wearing was somewhat familiar. Even her aura was somewhat familiar, as if he had seen her somewhere before. Who was this woman in white? To be able to defeat the combined forces of Zhu Luo and Guan Xingke, two storms of the 8 directions. Even if Zhu Luo had been heavily injured, the cultivation level displayed by the white-clothed woman was far too terrifying. A man wearing a bamboo hat appeared at the gate of Xuanyang City and helped Zhu Luo up from the ruins. The man's body was bleeding, and there seemed to be countless fragments of starlight in his blood. The blood and starlight gave off a terrifying feeling, as if a single drop could destroy an entire city. However, there were 3 large cracks on his bamboo hat, making it look like a fan that had been used for 70 years and had been torn apart by a servant girl in a fit of rage. It was an extremely sorry sight. This powerful man was naturally Guan Xingke. To be able to beat him in such a sorry state, who could it be? He gazed at the street 10 some li away, his face pale, shocked, and furious. Su Li gazed at the city gate through the drizzle and smiled. I said before, I have a friend, but she's rather busy and lives rather far away, so she needs some time to get here. Hearing these words, both the city gate and the street were abnormally quiet. Everyone was very quiet. At this moment, Hua Jiefu was kneeling in the rain with all the priests of Xuanyang City. Other than Chen Changsheng, who did not have much understanding of the cultivation world, everyone had already guessed at the identity of the white-clothed woman. Hearing Su Li's words, how could they not be silent, even silently cursing? Holy Maiden Peak was far away in the south, so it was naturally very far from Tianliang County in the north. A powerful figure like the white-clothed woman naturally had countless matters that needed to be handled. In the ruins of the city gate, Zhu Luo found it hard to restrain his shock and anger. Wiping away the blood at the corner of his lips, he asked, "Just what is going on here?" Su Li proudly replied, "I've also lived for several hundred years. An outstanding person like me will always get to know 1 or 2 outstanding friends. Do you think I'm Tian Hai, that I enjoy being a loner?" Such a proud appearance was rather repulsive in the eyes of many people. But he was Su Li, so those people could only endure. But Qin Changsheng still felt that there was something wrong with Su Li's current mood. Just at this moment, the white-clothed woman looked at Su Li and sighed. "So, it really is just a friend?" Su Li's smile gradually faded, and he seemed rather embarrassed. This was the first time Chen Changsheng had seen embarrassment on his face. Su Li was the most extreme person in the world, and he was also cold-blooded and emotionless, proud and unyielding. He almost looked down on everyone in the world, so how could he be embarrassed? Previously, he had not answered the white-clothed woman's question, but had instead spoken to Zhu Luo and Guan Xingke. This was already embarrassing, showing weakness. But who could have thought that the white-clothed woman would not even give him the chance to change the subject? Su Li was somewhat helpless. "Junior sister, don't be like this." Chen Changsheng was very shocked and very idiotically thought, could this white-clothed woman be a hidden expert of Mountly? You're actually colluding with this madman whose hands are covered in blood. How can you have the right to be holy maiden? Zhu Luo's furious voice resounded through all of Xuanyang City. Xuanyang City was deathly still. No one answered Zhu Luo's question. No one dared to answer this question. No one had the right to answer this question. Qin Changsheng was so shocked that he was speechless. He felt that it was inconceivable to the extreme. The white-clothed woman was one of the supreme 5 saints of the human world, the Holy Maiden of the South who stood side by side with the Tianhai Divine Empress. Only now did he understand. In the South, Holy Maiden Peak and the Longevity sect had always been viewed as being of the same root and same origin, especially the Mount Li Sword sect and South Stream Temple. They had always been on good terms, often referring to each other as fellow disciples. For example, Go Hanshi referred to Su Yorong as junior sister. Then Su Li could naturally refer to the current Holy Maiden as junior sister. Only, just like what Zhu Luo had yelled out in shock and anger, just why was this? Why are they the 5 saints, but you can only be the storms of the 8 directions? Su Li looked at Zhu Luo and Guan Xingke and said mockingly, because you'll never be as slippery as those old foxes. Before you clearly understand my trump cards, besides idiots like you, who would dare to lightly attack me? The Holy Maiden of the South glanced at him. Su Li paused, then said, What I mean is that your intelligence is insufficient. The Holy Maiden no longer paid any attention to him. She turned to Zhu Luo and Guan Xingke and calmly said, Whether or not I have the right to be the Holy Maiden is not something you two have the right to judge. As for senior brother, you always say that his hands are soaked in the blood of the innocent, but ask yourselves honestly, how could he have killed as many people as you have killed? How could he have killed as many as the saints? Guan Xingke lowered his head, hiding his face in his tattered bamboo hat. Zhu Luo was enraged by these words and yelled, Holy Maiden's words are preposterous. The Holy Maiden calmly said, Everyone's clans have tens of thousands of acres of fertile land, countless maids, and in times of famine, they never reduce rent. How many tenant farmers have they forced to death? The saints are even more so. With a casual decree, how many people will die for no reason? My senior brother does not control a storm of the 8 directions, does not become a saint. This is true benevolence. How is this cold-blooded? The entire city was silent, everyone looking pensive. Su Li waved his hand and said, Too much, a bit too much. At night, I began to sort out the next part of the plot about the capital and Qinsui. Chapter 424. Zhu Luo's voice was very angry and very harsh. It was very difficult to prefix the word harsh here. The most appropriate word was to add the word blood, just like how a cuckoo would bleed. But this would also be unbefitting of his status. Of course, if one recalled that his current enemy was the Holy Maiden of the South, one might be able to understand a little more. No matter what, you violated the oath of the sacred words from back then. Zhu Luo's furious rebuke echoed over the silent Xuanyang City, completely different from Guan Xingke's silence. The vast majority of the people who heard these words did not know what an oath of the sacred words was. They could only think of a few sayings from the highest laws of the various lands. The general meaning of these sayings was that the heavens did not distinguish north from south. The earth did not distinguish east from west. As long as it was within the territory of the alliance between the human world and the 2 shores of the Red River, experts of the divine domain could not argue with each other, much less fight. This was unless the attacked expert of the divine domain had done something completely contrary to the interests of their side. This was the so-called oath of the sacred words. From the perspective of the alliance between the humans and demi-humans to resist the demons, this oath was undoubtedly the most reasonable and necessary. The Holy Maiden's attack on Zhu Luo and Guan Xingke was the most unyielding betrayal of this oath. Then what about you? The entire world knows that although my senior brother has not entered the ranks of saints and does not rule over the storms of a direction, his cultivation has long since stepped into the divine domain. Why did you attack him? The Holy Maiden calmly said to the city gate, Wang Pa is one of the 5 youths most likely to enter the divine domain. You actually want to kill him for your own selfish reasons? Is this not a violation of the oath of the sacred words from back then? Her expression and tone were both very calm, but they naturally exuded a dignified and sacred qi. Zhu Luo angrily rebuked. Wangpa does not understand the greater picture. As a senior, I am teaching him a lesson. What selfish reasons do I have? The holy maiden calmly replied. The Zhu clan of Tianliang County want to continue for 10,000 generations. So how can we allow Wang Po to continue growing? If you don't admit that you have selfish motives, it only means that you don't even dare to face your own true heart. Zhu Luo was furious and prepared to retort, but the holy maiden continued. All oaths are spoken from the heart. For the sake of the Pope and senior brother May, I will not kill you today. Go. These words made Zhu Luo's anger attack his heart, his injuries suddenly erupting, and his blood gushed out even faster. The always silent Guan Xinca, upon seeing this wretched sight, suddenly rolled his eyes at the dark clouds over Xuanyang City. Rolling his eyes wasn't disdain, it was contempt, it was anger. He glanced at the sky, and the low-hanging dark clouds suddenly showed signs of dispersing. He could even vaguely see the radiance of a few stars in the night sky several miles away. Starlight suddenly enveloped Xuanyang City and fell upon the wet streets. It was like the white frost of an autumn day, and a somber aura flourished. From 10 some li away, the holy maiden looked at Guan Xinca in the city gate, raised her right hand, and pointed out a finger. There was a soft clap, followed by countless soft claps. It was as if tens of thousands of pieces of porcelain had been smashed by an expert skilled in group attacks. It was as though countless cultivators' seas of consciousness were shattering at the same time. It was incomparably crisp and clear, refreshing and soul-stirring. Pa 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 pa. The falling snowflakes on the street broke, and the frost that had just formed on the surface of the rain broke. Everything in the 10 some li between this place and the city gate broke. Guan Xinca's bamboo hat was also torn to shreds, and the corner of his lips also broke, beginning to bleed. His heart, brimming with viciousness and pride, was finally completely shattered at this moment. He no longer hesitated. Supporting Zhu Luo, he turned and ran towards that plain outside Xuanyang City that seemed to be covered in the darkness, but in reality, no one knew what time it had been buried. In an instant, he disappeared without a trace. Xuanyang City was incomparably quiet, as if not a single person was present. The ordinary people that did not have the ability to participate in this battle all hid in their own Kong beds, behind their windows, or in front of their fences. They were still anxious and fearful, and even their breathing seemed stifled. Those cultivators that had the ability to participate in this battle, those cultivators that wanted to kill Su Li, could only follow in Zhu Luo and Guan Xinca's footsteps and leave, including experts like Liang Wang's son and Shui He. Hua Jiefu brought along the priests of Xuanyang City, isolating the streets and alleys that had been ravaged by the torrential rain, leaving them a quiet and undisturbed space to converse. At this moment, besides Su Li and the Holy Maiden of the South, there were naturally only those 3 people who had used their lives and unimaginable willpower to ensure that Su Li could live until now. It had begun with the coup of the Garden of Zhou, ended with the encirclement of the demons on the snowy plains, and then continued from the military stronghold all the way to Xuanyang City. Finally, the cold-blooded slaughter had come to an end, and the assassination attempt against Su Li had finally come to an end. Su Li had not died. Those people who want him dead had all failed. From a military stronghold to Xuanyang City, he had brought Chen Chongqing with him the entire time. But he was keenly aware that the one that could ultimately resolve this problem was that friend of his that no one in the continent knew about. Of course, the word friend needed to be in doubt. Perhaps it was precisely because he needed to be in doubt that it was somewhat awkward. Su Li looked at the Holy Maiden of the South and casually said, giving off a feeling that it was only right and proper, "Why did you come so late?" Anyone that heard this sort of reproach after saving someone would be very angry. But the Holy Maiden was not angry. On the contrary, she very calmly replied, "I was delayed by someone for a while." Calmness truly was a sort of strength representing seriousness. Su Li had felt this sort of strength many years ago, but but he had never known how to confront it. A large part of the reason why he wandered the four seas and paid no attention to the affairs of the world was that he wanted to avoid this sort of strength. Even now, he had not learned how to directly confront this sort of strength, but at least he had learned how to change the topic. Delayed by who? The Holy Maiden did not directly answer his question. My disciple is heavily injured. Just at this moment, a somewhat uncertain but definitely concerned and shocked voice rose up. Su Yurong is injured? Is she all right? The person that asked this question was naturally Qin Changsheng. The Holy Maiden's gaze fell on the youth. She did not smile, not even the lightest of smiles. She was very calm, and thus very dignified, very solemn, very frightening. She asked, "You're Qin Changsheng?" Qin Changsheng suddenly understood where the problem lay. He and Su Yurong were very hostile in various ways. He had once thought that if he were Su Yurong's relative, presumably he would also not have any good impressions of that youth called Qin Changsheng. The Holy Maiden was Su Yurong's teacher, the person that loved and doted on Su Yurong the most. But he had just experienced a magnificent battle, a question of life and death. It was impossible for him to choose to retreat at this moment. He looked at the Holy Maiden and very seriously said, "Yes, I am Qin Changsheng. Tonight, flowers fall like snow." Chapter 4:25. The atmosphere on the street changed too quickly. Just a moment ago, it was still a magnificent scene, and the next moment, it should have been a leisurely conversation. Who would have thought that they would directly enter the rhythm of domestic trifles? Of course, everyone knew that the Holy Maiden's question had a deeper meaning. Under normal circumstances, Qin Changsheng's answer would be somewhat rigid and lacking in etiquette, but the wonderful thing was that the Holy Maiden of the South was not an ordinary person, nor was she like those ordinary Holy Maidens in history. She liked Su Li. She dared to like that Su Li who liked the demon princess, so she was very satisfied with Qin Changsheng's answer. She felt that this youth was very calm, very simple, and very powerful. She gave Qin Changsheng a deep glance. This was a truly profound glance, not like the glance she gave Su Li at the very beginning, which hid many complicated emotions. This was a profound glance that everyone could understand. It was unknown what sort of impression she had of Qin Changsheng in the past, but at least she was rather satisfied with their meeting today. Perhaps this had a lot to do with Qin Changsheng standing in front of Su Li covered in blood. With this glance, the rain over Xuanyang City stopped and the clouds scattered, revealing the true sky behind it. There was no moon of the northern devil race, nor was there a river of stars by the sea. There was only a stretch of azure blue. The setting sun hung far away in the wilderness outside the city. It was still dusk. The blood-like twilight shone on Lu Qing's face, which was full of wounds and blood clots, making it even more terrifying. He walked towards the city gate, ignoring everyone else. "Why?" Su Li looked at his back and asked. Lu Qing stopped and said after a moment of silence, "What I said to Zhu Luo was true." Su Li said, "Of course I know you're telling the truth." Not long after he left the military stronghold, he knew that Lu Qing had been following him. He had always thought that Lu Qing wanted to kill him, but he had never cared that Lu Qing wanted to kill him. Everything was for the same reason. He had known Lu Qing for many years. He knew Lu Qing's assassination habits and style. Many years ago, he had left Lu Qing and the others without hesitation. He thought that he would not miss them at all. In fact, in the long years that followed, he rarely thought of them. No matter how he looked at it, Lu Qing and those guys had a reason to hate him and wanted to kill him. My thoughts are different from theirs. They think that we're even, but I think that you owe us. That's why I want to kill you. Of course, this is my best chance. Lu Qing didn't turn around. After a moment of silence, he said, "I thought you would be as miserable as an old dog this time, and I would definitely be very happy to see you. But after following you for these days, the more I look at you, the more uncomfortable I feel. You brought us into this profession, and if you are humiliated, then we are humiliated. Even if I want to kill you, only I can do it. How can I let others touch you?" Su Li was silent for a while, then said, "What nonsense." Lu Qing raised his head and gazed at the distant setting sun outside the city. "In truth, it's very simple. I just suddenly understood why you left us back then. In the end, you were a person of Mount Li. Your life has always been different from ours. In the previous battle, Zhu Luo had angrily accused Lu Qing of being a person of Mount Li. Lu Qing did not admit it. Although he used the sword style of Mount Li and was open and above board, he was still an assassin who walked in the darkness. After hearing Lu Qing's words, Su Li fell into a very serious silence. Then, for the first time, he gave an explanation for that trifling matter back then, a past that his younger self did not care much about. Back then, I left mainly because it was too unchallenging. He said, "Don't tell me I have to spend every day thinking about how to kill the demon lord in black robe." Lu Qing gazed at the setting sun and very seriously said, "That last mission we took, that matter we talked about, wasn't it rather interesting?" Even when facing Zhu Luo and Guan Xingke, two great experts, Su Li's face was still undisciplined and uncaring. But after hearing Lu Qing's words, his expression became solemn. He looked at Lu Qing and said, "That woman is not easy to kill. I advise you not to have any thoughts." Lu Qing didn't say anything else and walked out of the city. Not long after, he disappeared into the twilight. Qin Changsheng was somewhat confused by this conversation and asked Su Li, "What were you talking about?" Su Li replied, "Many years ago, someone asked me to kill a person." "Kill who?" "You know Tianhai." In Su Li's view, there were 3.5 most powerful women in the world: the Divine Empress, the Holy Maiden of the South, the Empress of the Demi-Humans in White Emperor City, and that freak in Xiulao City. But the most difficult to kill would always be that one. Of course, it was Tianhai. Wasn't it the elders of the longevity sect who forced Senior to do it? There were also people who tried to pay me to do it. Truly crazy. No matter who it is, they all have a price. Senior. These words seem more appropriate to say from Lu Qing's mouth. Is it very strange to say it from me? Senior, you and Lu Qing, just what is your relationship? I was the one who brought him into the profession of assassins, and I was also the one who taught him his skills. Su Li's reply was very casual, like he was talking about a trifling matter that was not worth mentioning. Qin Changsheng suddenly thought of a matter, a possibility. Back in the wilderness, he had encountered the 28 divine General Shui He. With Su Li's assistance, he had cut off one of Shui He's arms, but he was also worried that Shui He would be conveniently killed by Lu Qing, who was hiding in the wilderness. When Su Li spoke of Lu Qing's origins, he also mentioned the chief assassin on the ranking of assassins that the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had ranked. In their conversation, Su Li was also rather respectful towards that assassin. Qin Changsheng looked at Su Li and asked in disbelief, "Could it be? Senior, you are that #1 assassin in the world?" "When I was young, I worked in this profession for a period of time. And then, if you do a profession, you have to love it, and you have to do it to the extreme." Su Li said matter-of-factly, "As an assassin, I am naturally the strongest assassin." Qin Changsheng was very shocked. He could not understand why such an otherworldly expert would become an assassin. Su Li glanced at the yellow paper umbrella in his hand and said somewhat ruefully, "At that time, I was really short of money." He did not finish. At that time, he was so short of money that he could not even buy a broken umbrella. With this, some questions were easily resolved. At the time, Qin Changsheng felt that something was wrong. How could Su Li admire an assassin, even if it was the #1 assassin in the world? Only now did he understand that the so-called admiration was still just narcissism. The twilight gradually dimmed. It was no longer blood red, but rather more warm. An extremely sacred ray of light slowly entered Wang Po's body. His wounds began to heal at a visible rate. Previously, in the inn, in order to defeat Painted Armor Xiao Zhang and Liang Wangsun in a single blow, Wang Po had paid a very heavy price. Afterwards, in order to block Zhu Luo, he had been heavily injured. Now, he had basically recovered, but he did not know if he could make up for the loss of lifespan. The sacred light technique displayed by the Holy Maiden was truly close to a divine technique. Compared to the sacred light techniques of the Li Palace priests, the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, and the disciples of South Stream Temple, It was like the difference between a firefly and a star. Wang Pa stood up and bowed to the holy maiden in thanks. He did not even glance at Su Li, because he did not like Su Li. He had come to Xuanyang City for business and reason, not for this person. He walked up to Chen Changsheng and said, "We've met before. Several months ago, at the main gate of the Mausoleum of Books, Chen Changsheng and Wang Pa had met once. That night was precisely the night that Sun Mei failed to break into the divine path and died." Chen Changsheng replied, "Yes, senior." Wang Po's eyebrows drooped weakly. He seemed rather dispirited, and his voice was the same. "You're not bad." Chen Changsheng felt very happy, because he believed that Wang Po was truly a very good senior. Many young geniuses worshipped Su Li, but he did not. He felt that Su Li was very annoying, even though Su Li had taught him many things. He felt that compared to Wang Po, Su Li was wrong everywhere. Even though Su Li was much stronger than Wang Po, in the past 16 years, he had only worshipped his senior brother Yurin. Now, it seemed like the object of his worship was another person called Wang Po. On the other side, Su Li finally asked that question, "How is my family's girl?" The holy maiden replied, "Mount Li sent a letter, so there shouldn't be any major problems." Su Li asked, "Then what about Mount Li?" The holy maiden replied, "I left in a hurry, so I only know that there are some problems." Su Li's eyebrows rose like swords, then gradually fell. After a moment of silence, he said, "With Qiushan, there should be no problems." When Chen Changsheng heard that name, he subconsciously looked over. Chapter 4:26. Chen Changsheng had never seen Qiushan Jun before. He could only guess what kind of person Qiushan Jun was through the retelling of Gohan Shi and the others and the praises of the common people. Gohan Shi, Guanfei Bai, Qi Jian, and the others in his eyes were all very impressive. Each of them had their own areas of respect and learning, but every time they talked about Qiushan Jun, they would very naturally reveal that kind of absolute trust. This is a very scary thing. Now, Su Li actually believed that as long as Qiushan Jun was present, the chaos in Mount Li should be fine. This sort of trust was even more terrifying. It must be known that no matter how outstanding Qiushan Jun was, he was still a young man, not even 20 years of age. How could Su Li be so sure that as long as he was present, Mount Li would not fall into chaos? He didn't understand, or rather, he didn't have confidence in himself at the beginning. Wang Pa looked in his eyes and said very seriously, "Qiushan Jun is really not bad." The entire continent knew about the engagement, and even he found it interesting. A lot of people want to know, what kind of story would Chen Changsheng, Su Rong, and Qiushan Jun, the three most outstanding figures of the younger generation, develop in the future? Wang Pa really admired Chen Changsheng, so he wanted to remind the youth of how amazing of a person his future opponent would be. Chen Changsheng didn't know how to respond. Su Li replied, "He's not as good as Qiushan, at least not right now." Wang Pa replied, "Although it's not as good, it's not too far off. Besides, whether it's better or not has never been our problem." This sentence had a deeper meaning, but Chen Changsheng understood it clearly. On a certain level, he and Wang Pa could communicate, even though they were still strangers. Wang Pa and Chen Changsheng clasped their hands in greeting, then bid farewell. Su Li suddenly said, "Why do I feel somewhat unhappy?" The holy maiden looked at him and asked with a smile, "Jealous?" Su Li said, "What are you saying?" The holy maiden said, "Chen Changsheng and Wang Pa are the same kind of people, but not you." Su Li said somewhat helplessly, "That child Qiushan doesn't really resemble me." The holy maiden said, "There's a young man who looks like you." "Who?" "The Tang old master's grandson, Tang Tang." Su Li said in disgust, "I hate the people of the Tang clan the most." The holy maiden said, "People often hate themselves the most." Su Li sneered, "Junior sister has lived on Holy Maiden Peak for too long, and your conversation is getting more and more boring." The saintess smiled and said, "Then, senior martial brother, can you take me to travel around the four seas?" Thus, there was nothing to say. Wang Pa had nothing more to say. He turned and walked out of Xuanyang City, his tall and thin body slightly stooped. He didn't seem like an expert of the proclamation of liberation at all. Didn't seem like a brave warrior who had just fought a magnificent battle. He only seemed like a shabby accountant. Looking at his back, Su Li asked, "Do you know why he's called Wang Po of Tianyang?" This question was obviously directed at Chun Changsheng. Chun Changsheng said, "I don't want to know." Su Li was rather surprised and rather annoyed. Chun Changsheng was more concerned about something else. "Why does it seem like he doesn't want to talk to you?" Su Li was even more annoyed. "This kid has never liked me, so naturally he won't talk to me." Wang Po's blade cultivated the straightforward path. If he did not like Su Li, he would not care about Su Li. Regardless of whether Su Li was Su Li, if he wanted to save Su Li, he would come to save Su Li, even if Su Li was Su Li. Just as he had once said, he always treated matters and not people. Just when Qin Changsheng was prepared to say something, he noticed that the holy maiden had been quietly standing at Su Li's side the entire time. She did not interrupt, nor did she make any movements. She was just like a little bird resting on a wudong tree. Who would have thought that the junior martial uncle of Mount Li, famed for being cold-blooded and murderous, would actually have this sort of relationship with the holy maiden of the South, famed for her purity and holiness? Su Li knew what he was thinking and said, "No one is truly isolated, except for that empress of yours." This was already the second time he had mentioned a similar conclusion. It was unknown if there was some deeper meaning hidden within it. The holy maiden had been watching Chun Changsheng the entire time. She felt that compared to Su Li, this youth seemed a little too dull and could not compare to Qiushan Jun's elegant bearing. He could only barely be considered satisfactory. But she then thought, could this be the obsession in her heart causing mischief? Could it be affecting her own judgment? As a result, she had never expressed it. The so-called obsession was something that could not be desired. Back then, for all sorts of complicated reasons, she and Su Li could not be together, and it was impossible for them to be together. In these past few years, they did not even have any contact on the surface, such that no one in South Stream Temple or the Mount Li sword sect knew. As a result, she had always had thoughts about Su Yorong's marriage. She wanted Su Yorong to marry Qiushan Jun, because Qiushan Jun truly was outstanding enough, even perfect, completely worthy of her female disciple. Moreover, the entire continent knew that, although there was no official title, Su Li's true successor in Mount Li was Qiushan Jun. Hoping that the next generation could complete the task that she had not completed back then was also a kind of obsession. With this thought, she subconsciously glanced at Su Li, her eyes still as complicated as the sea of stars. "Although I don't like this kid, I have to admit that he's not one bit inferior to Qiushan." Su Li looked at her and smiled. "Just now, I was intentionally bickering with Wang Po because I couldn't bear to see his lifeless appearance." The holy maiden said, "Qiushan is your successor." Su Li looked at Chun Changsheng and said, "On the way here, I also taught him a few things." The holy maiden was very clear on how proud Su Li's personality was and how high his standards were. She could not help but be somewhat shocked. She looked at Chun Changsheng and said with a smile, "If that's the case, then I need to treat you even more seriously." Anyone would feel proud to receive these words from the holy maiden. Moreover, if Chun Changsheng wanted to marry Su Yorong, the meaning hidden in the holy maiden's words would make him even happier. But now, when he saw the holy maiden's white clothes, he subconsciously thought of the white clothes in the Garden of Zhou, that young girl. As a result, his next words blurted out, "My lady misunderstands. I have no plans to complete the engagement." After saying this, Chun Changsheng's mood became somewhat strange, as if he had returned to the divine general of the East's estate a year ago. He relaxed a little, but for some reason, he also felt somewhat disappointed and frustrated. Perhaps he no longer needed to bear any burden. It had always been these two diametrically opposed emotions. When the holy maiden's attitude had just changed, he had brought up the matter of annulling the engagement. The holy maiden would definitely be angry, and he did not dare to face it directly. He looked at Su Li and said, "Senior, after returning to Mount Li, I must trouble you to quickly take care of that matter." He was naturally speaking about the matter of Liang Xiaoxiao using his death to accuse the three of colluding with the demons. Su Li said nothing. Qi Jian was his daughter, so he would naturally take care of this matter. Chun Changsheng suddenly thought of another matter. He looked at Su Li and said seriously, Senior, I won. After returning to the human world from the snowy plains of the land of demons, he had suffered an assassination in the military stronghold, and then he had been pursued by the cavalry of the great Zhou in the snowy forest. At the time, Chun Changsheng and Su Li had had a conversation, and there had been a few more conversations afterwards about this world and the hearts of people. Su Li believed that this world was ice cold. Chun Changsheng believed that this world was warm. Su Li believed that the hearts of people were sinister. Chun Changsheng believed that not everyone's hearts were like this. They did not make a bet, but they both knew what the other was thinking. At the end, in the beautiful spring sunshine of Xuanyang City, Chun Changsheng pushed open the window, yelled out those words, and opened the lid of the dice cup. Chun Changsheng believed that he had won. Su Li said, just like Zhu Luo said, in the entire world, there is only one idiot, one youth, and one ghost that cannot see the light. Chun Changsheng said, but in the end there is still one idiot, one youth, and that ghost that cannot see the light. In the end, it really did appear in the light of day, standing in front of you. That assassin that had followed them for several dozen days, in Chun Changsheng's view, was a very beautiful matter, a very heartwarming story. He said, the facts prove that human nature is good. Su Li shook his head. I still don't think so. Chun Changsheng said, but at least there's a good side. Just like how Senior is decisive in killing and looks down on the world, but there's also a good side. Su Li arched his brows. It's not like you're frying a pancake. So where did you get so many sides? Do you want to add an egg? Chun Changsheng asked. Then in the hot spring in the snowy mountains, why did Senior lie to me at the very beginning? You didn't hesitate to play the role of a villain to infuriate and frighten me, so that I could leave? Senior could have just said it. He had asked Su Li this question at the very beginning, but Su Li had never given him an answer. Su Li looked into his eyes and said, it's not because I'm a good person, but because you're a good person, a real person. So if I had directly told you to leave, you wouldn't have left. Chun Changsheng fell silent for a while, then said, but Senior still wanted me to leave, not wanting to drag me down. He believed that this was the best proof. Su Li was a good person. For some reason, he was especially obsessed with proving this point. Su Li was somewhat annoyed by his pestering. He said, I'm not a good person. I just believe that you young people will definitely be stronger than my generation in the future, so I don't want you to die too early. Humans are a very interesting kind of life. They always like to reminisce about the past and retro, thinking that the old is good and the past is perfect. But I don't think so. I believe that each generation will always be stronger than the previous. My master was stronger than the founder of the Mountly Sword sect, and I am stronger than my master. So I have to be stronger than Old Man Yin, Zhu Luo, and the rest of them. Wang Pe and the rest of them have to be stronger than my generation, and Xioshan and your generation have to be stronger than them. Only by believing in this point and fighting for it can humans continue to live on the continent, and even live better and better. The setting sun was about to completely sink into the ground. Xuanyang City was rather dark, but did not make people grieve. On the contrary, it was very much like early morning, just like Su Li's words, brimming with the vitality of life. So Senior has always been helping me, teaching me. Yes, compared to those old things, I like you young people even more. So that year, Senior didn't kill Liang Wang's son and Liang Hongzhuang. Liang Xiaoxiao even entered the Mountly Sword sect, and in that dangerous inn, Senior's final strike did not fall on Xiao Zhang and Liang Wang's son. Perhaps, but who told you that was my final strike? But why don't Senior like those old people? Those old people, they're old, decaying, lifeless. They don't seek to advance, only know how to scheme and scheme. They're not honorable, not upright, not open, so they don't have a sharp edge. A strength without a sharp edge is meaningless to humans, so I will continue to watch over them. But you all have to quickly prop it up. Prop it up? Yes, prop it up with an indomitable spirit. Saying this, Su Li and the Holy Maiden walked side by side out of Xuanyang City. Chun Changsheng stood behind them. Hua Jiefu and the priest stood even further away. The setting sun was like the morning sun. The night breeze was slightly cool like the morning breeze, and the remaining drops of rain on the street were very much like dew. From the Garden of Zhou to Xuanyang City, the things he had experienced were not like a dream. They were as real as the wounds on his body, but he could faintly sense that he had forgotten something very important. He did not know that a storm was currently waiting for him in the capital. He only wanted to remember that matter. And then he remembered. He yelled at Su Li's back in the setting sun, "Senior, that umbrella is mine." The second volume, Lord Mo's Journey Long Ago. Chapter 427. Qin Changsheng was about to return to the capital. Upon hearing this news, Zhuang Huanyu fell silent for a very long time, just like a few days ago when he heard that Qin Changsheng was still alive. After the party from the Garden of Zhou left Hanqiu City and returned to the capital, Zheshio was requested by the imperial court from the Li Palace. Everyone believed that Qin Changsheng had died along with the collapse of the Garden of Zhou. After returning to Mount Li, Qi Jian was still unconscious. Moreover, the matters between men and women were the most likely to cause trouble in the world. He believed that no one would believe Zheshio and Qi Jian's explanations, so he was very happy. He felt that his life had finally returned to the right path. However, he would occasionally think of Liang Xiaoxiao, that young genius who had used the final move of the Mount Li sword style to commit suicide in front of him. Thus, his body would begin to grow cold. No matter how many blankets he covered himself with, he would never be able to warm up. It was as if the shadow of a demon was always quietly standing in the air around him. However, what made him feel even colder was that Qin Changsheng had not died. He had appeared in the wilderness to the north of Tianliang County. It was said that he was together with that legendary junior martial uncle of Mount Li. Following that, it was said that divine General Shui he had passed away, but Qin Changsheng had still not died. They had gone to Xuanyang City. Following that, Liang Wang's son and painted armor Xiao Zhang appeared. Zhu Luo and Guan Xinke. The two storms of 8 directions appeared. Qin Changsheng had actually not died. Why didn't you die? Zhuang Huanyu stood in the courtyard, looking up at the pitch-black night sky that seemed like an abyss. His face was pale, and he muttered to himself, "Why didn't you die?" He looked up at the night sky in silence for a very long time, then muttered, "No one would believe it." Several months ago, after that night, when Wang Zhizi comprehended the Tao, the capital of the Great Zhou was once again bathed in silver starlight. That was because Qin Changsheng was viewing the monoliths and cultivating in the mausoleum of books. After that night, the entire continent knew of his meritorious service for the human world and also knew of the Li Palace's true attitude towards him. Qin Changsheng became the youngest principal of the Tradition Academy in history. His Holiness had chosen him as his successor. He was the successor of the Orthodoxy. No one believed that the successor of the Orthodoxy would collude with the demons, because it was impossible for the demons to give him any greater benefits. If he had died in the Garden of Zhou at the very beginning, or perhaps for the benefit of some living person, some people could have tried to believe him. However, Su Li had returned to Mount Li alive, and Qin Changsheng had returned to the capital alive. Then everything had come to an end, and the scheme that Liang Xiaoxiao had weaved with his own death was about to be broken. Of course, there were also people who held different views, such as that terrifying Lord Zhou Tong. This was because Zhou Tong knew that Qin Changsheng was Taoist Ji's student. He believed that Taoist Ji, for the sake of vengeance, would not hesitate to sacrifice the entire human world, much less collude with the demon race. However, Zhuang Huanyu did not know of these things. So as more and more news of Qin Changsheng's return to the south spread to the capital, he became more and more taciturn. He no longer left his small courtyard, and his confident figure could no longer be seen in the verdant forest of the heavenly Tao Academy. He began to understand why Liang Xiaoxiao would so resolutely die when he saw Zheshio carrying Qi Jian into the mountainside whispering wood in the Garden of Zhou. Besides death, what else could he do? He lowered his head and gazed at the quiet well in the courtyard. He gazed at the well water that reflected the gloomy starlight and suddenly shivered. Ever since he was a child, he and his mother had relied on each other for survival. He passed his days in poverty, diligently studying. When he came to the capital, he entered the Heavenly Tao Academy. Because his father was the vice principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy, and because his talent in cultivation was extremely high, he received the love of many teachers and the respect and love of his schoolmates. However, he had never relaxed his demands on himself. Even in the cold winter, he still persisted in using the ice-cold well water to bathe. It was already late spring, and the capital was very hot and stuffy. It even felt like summer, but he felt that the well water was somewhat cold. That cold feeling made one feel fear and despair. Gazing at the mouth of the quiet well, Zhuang Huanyu's face grew paler and paler. After a very long time, he finally turned and left the well. This was the first time in many days that he had left the small courtyard he lived in. On the way, the students of the Heavenly Tao Academy that he met all looked at him with astonished expressions. One by one, they moved to the side of the road and bowed in greeting. Zhuang Huanyu acted as if he did not see anything, nor did he speak to his schoolmates. He directly walked to the front of a building in the depths of the Heavenly Tao Academy. This was the residence of the principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy. Back then, Mao Qiyu had lived here. Later on, Mao Qiyu went to the Li Palace to take over as Archbishop of the Hall of Subjugation, and this place became the residence of the new principal. The new principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy was surnamed Zhuang, and he was his father. Standing outside the quiet residence, separated by the sparse plum branches, Zhuang Huanyu once again fell silent for a very long time as he gazed at the lights in the building and the figure of that man. However, his face was no longer as pale as it was before. Back then, his father had abandoned his mother and son and entered the capital to take the imperial examination. He had an ambiguous relationship with that girl from the Wenshui Tangs and was very ungrateful and ungrateful. This was the story that Zhuang Huanyu persisted in believing, and this had always been his view of his father. Thus, he had always harbored a great hatred and malice towards his father. As a result, when facing his father, he would always have the greatest courage. He did not know why he had come here tonight, but he realized that because of his anger towards that man behind the window, the despair and coldness in his heart had actually improved by a great deal. Afterwards, he left the Heavenly Tao Academy and walked to the stone pillar of the Li Palace. He stopped and did not continue forward. He was a genius of the Heavenly Tao Academy and was also one of the next generation that the orthodoxy had focused on nurturing. He had sufficient qualifications to enter the Li Palace, but he did not, because he had not come to the Li Palace to sightsee, but to see those last few night cherry trees. He had come to the Li Palace to see a person, but even if he entered the Li Palace, he would not be able to see that person. Just like how, even though he was a genius like Zhuang Huanyu, he did not have the qualifications to approach that person. Just like before in the Heavenly Tao Academy, he could only occasionally see that fairy-like junior sister in Principal Mao Qiyu's garden, and then watch her depart like a fairy. Standing in front of the Li Palace, he calmly gazed at the Hall of Pure Virtue in the darkness, imagining the life of that junior sister in the Pope's green leaf world. Zhuang Huanyu began to reminisce. He wanted to sort through the events of the past few years, to understand just how all these things had happened. Several years ago, he and she had met in the Heavenly Tao Academy, and then, at the Ivy League gathering, they had met again. When he had originally thought that they could get to know each other, he had seen her holding the sleeve of a youth called Chen Changsheng. Yes, so this was how everything had started. By the lake in the Garden of Zhou, when Liang Xiaoxiao had suddenly launched a sneak attack, when the demon experts were about to kill Chen Changsheng, Zhixiu, and Qi Jian, he had been in the forest, not drawing his sword, not meeting. Yes, because he had been afraid, he was still a youth, and he wanted to live. But now that he thought about it, wasn't it also because he had always had a deep jealousy and hatred towards Chen Changsheng? He really wanted Chen Changsheng to die. Why didn't you die? It suddenly began to rain in the capital, and the Li Palace was naturally no exception. The air of late spring was instantly washed clean by the rain, and the wet stone slabs actually began to faintly emit a cold air. Zhuang Huanyu did not hold up an umbrella. He just stood in the rain, silent for a very long time. A priest of the Li Palace came to inquire, But upon realizing that it was him, they thought of the news that Qin Changsheng would be returning to the capital tomorrow and believed that they had guessed at something, so they did not disturb him. In the rain, the priests and students of the 6 Ivies came and went with umbrellas. When they saw his drenched body, their gazes were very complicated. There was some pity, some sympathy, and, of course, there was also some ridicule. Zhuang Huanyu returned to the small courtyard of the Heavenly Tao Academy. His clothes were completely drenched in the rain, so how could he care about the cold? But for some reason, in the end, he still did not jump into that deep and cold well. In the final moment of his life, he had protected a bit of his pride. He had used a sword. He had chosen to die under his own sword. The news of Zhuang Huanyu's death quickly spread to the entire capital. The gray courtyard, not too far from the imperial city, was the first place to receive this news, because this was the department for purging officials. When Zhou Tong heard this news, he was carrying a lantern and standing in front of a stalk of green wormwood in the vegetable field, attempting to find the wormwood stalk bug that had bitten half to death the orchid he was raising last night. Zhuang Huanyu's death was naturally related to Qin Changsheng's return to the capital. The people standing on Qin Changsheng's side would presumably feel proud and elated, while those people that had once tried to use this matter to attack Qin Changsheng and even the orthodoxy would inevitably feel somewhat disappointed. Zhou Tong was probably the only person in the world that truly believed that Qin Changsheng might be colluding with the demons. But not only did he not feel defeated, he even began to laugh. It's good that he died. He truly was very happy. Although it was not to the extent that he was rocking back and forth with laughter, the lantern in his hand began to sway, so much so that the shadow of the wormwood stalk turned into many blurs in the vegetable field, just like a fence. From the conclusion of the matter in Xuanyang City to the confirmation that Su Li was alive and Qin Changsheng was also alive, the winds in the capital instantly changed. The Li Palace and the military exerted enormous pressure on the department for purging officials, demanding that it release Zhixiu. Releasing Zhixiu was a gift, a great gift to welcome Qin Changsheng's return. Of course, Zhou Tong would not release Zhixiu. If not for the fact that Qin Changsheng's identity was too sensitive, he would definitely have imprisoned Qin Changsheng in the great prison in the front courtyard. So he believed that Zhuang Huanyu's death was good, that the dead could not testify was good. Of course, he was keenly aware that with Qin Changsheng's current status, Zhuang Huanyu's death did not have much meaning. But there would definitely be people who would use this matter. The fresh rain blew away the dust. The feeling of spring in the capital had not lessened, but rather deepened. It was extremely bright and beautiful, even somewhat sticky. A convoy of carriages returned to the capital. Qin Changsheng sat in the carriage, feeling the ripples coming from his sheath. He knew that the black dragon was about to awaken and was very comforted. Then, he heard a voice from outside the carriage. "Traitor!" Many people knew that the person in the carriage was Qin Changsheng. The commoners of the capital who were used to the bustle could not help but crowd the two sides of the street to watch the spectacle. They discussed spiritedly, their voices clamoring, and the scene was incomparably lively. When these two words rang out, the streets of the capital instantly became incomparably quiet. Chapter 428. The word traitor was actually not appropriate, or perhaps not accurate enough. In this story, it was more appropriate to call it a spy, or something else. For example, the following words that broke the silence of the crowd. "Qin Changsheng, you scoundrel. You actually colluded with the demons to kill the talents of Mount Li. And now you even forced young Master Huanyu to death." Forced to death? I think some powerful figure used some shameful method. This is a shameless murder. Too shameful. What nonsense are you spouting? After viewing the monoliths in the mausoleum of books, Qin Changsheng was no longer the target of hostility and hatred of the people of the capital. Many people had already begun to treat him as the glory of the great Zhou. Some people loudly criticized Qin Changsheng, and naturally, there were even louder people who defended him. For a moment, the streets of the capital were filled with the sounds of quarreling and bustling with noise. Chun Chongsheng looked at the curtains and listened to the noise outside the carriage in shock. On the road, he had finally learned of all the details of what had happened outside the Garden of Zhou through Hua Jiefu. He had originally thought that after returning to the capital, the first thing he would do would be to confront Zhuang Huanyu. Who would have thought that last night, Zhuang Huanyu would actually die? The noise outside the carriage grew louder and louder. The quarrels of the crowd grew fiercer and fiercer, their words sharper and sharper. It was noisy and vexing. Chun Chongsheng wanted to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. He lowered his head in silence, his eyelashes trembling. The childishness on his face was finally about to disappear. Whether it was the cheers of the crowd or the accusations of the crowd, Chun Chongsheng returned to the capital under the gaze of countless people of the capital. Only when the convoy drove into the depths of Hundred Flowers Lane did the world outside the window finally calm down. With the palace clergy guarding the perimeter of the Hundred Blossom Lane, no one was able to approach. Chun Chongsheng looked at Orthodox Academy's still very new gate and the green vines that were still very old. Feeling the solemn and quiet atmosphere that came from all around, he felt a little uncomfortable. One day of viewing the monoliths of the front mausoleum, one night of starlight bathing the capital. It had not been too long since the Pope had established his position as the successor of the Orthodoxy. Moreover, after leaving the Mausoleum of Books, he had entered the Garden of Zhou. The days in the plains of the unsetting sun felt like years. What followed next was the 10,000 li of snowy plains. He had been in such a hurry to escape that he had no time, nor did he have the opportunity to experience any changes. Now, he felt like a lifetime had passed. Many things had changed. The Orthodox Academy that had once been surrounded by countless enraged commoners of the capital was now a place that ordinary people simply could not approach. Although it was still far from recovering its former glory, its atmosphere was completely new. Fortunately, there were still many things that had not changed. Jin Yulu was still standing in front of the Tradition Academy's gate. The silk robe that he was wearing, which was covered with patterns of copper coins, was still as smooth as water. Xian Yuan Po was still as mighty and majestic as ever. His arms were thicker than trees. When he hugged Xian Yuan Po, Jin Yulu always felt like he was being swallowed. Luo Luo was still Luo Luo. She entered his embrace like a cool breeze, her hands wrapped around his neck, her forehead rubbing against his chin, a satisfied smile on her face. Standing on the great banyan tree by the lake, Chun Chongsheng and Luluo talked for a very long time. He told the little girl everything that had happened in the Garden of Zhou, as well as everything that had happened on their journey south, without missing a single detail. That elf girl, was she very beautiful? Luo Luo only cared about this. She widened her eyes, looked at Chun Chongsheng, and asked curiously. There were so many things. There was a grand battle. There was a conspiracy and assassination. There was a sword that traveled 10,000 miles. There was an unsheathing of 10,000 swords. There was an iron blade that broke through the wind and rain. Luo Luo only cared about these. Chun Chongsheng naturally could not forget that girl called Chen Chujian, but he suddenly realized that he could not clearly remember her appearance. For some reason, he felt a chill run through his body, as if he was losing something. Luo Luo could sense the change in his mood. She looked at him sympathetically and grabbed his sleeve. She softly said, "Teacher, don't worry. I'll think of a way to have someone investigate." The journey from Xuanyang City to the capital was very long. There was a lot of time. Besides clearing his memories and preparing for the capital, Chun Chongsheng naturally did not forget to ask the people of the Orthodoxy to help find the whereabouts of Lady Chujian. However, neither the priests of the Li Palace nor the people of Hanqiu City could confirm that there was such a girl among the ethereal opening cultivators that had entered the Garden of Zhou. Thus, it was naturally even more impossible to confirm that she had survived. Hearing Luolua's words, Chun Chongsheng felt a little more at ease. The elves had a very close relationship with White Emperor City and the Great Western Continent. Luolua's mother was the eldest princess of the Great Western Continent, and her father was the White Emperor of the demi-humans. It should be more convenient for her to ask someone to investigate. Luoluo added, Zhuang Huanyu is dead. She had long forgotten that when she was studying in the Heavenly Tao Academy, she had once seen that genius classmate of hers in Principal Mao's garden. She only mentioned it now because she was worried that Zhuang Huanyu's death would bring trouble to her teacher. Chen Changsheng was quiet for a while, then said, I know. Luoluo added, Teacher, I went to the Imperial Palace twice to have them release Shishio, but I didn't succeed. Chen Changsheng rubbed her head and smiled. So you're to blame? Luoluo rubbed her head against his palm. She had a tiger's head and was very cute. The sunlight fell on the spring lake and then reflected off the branches of the great banyan tree, transforming into countless motes of light that could change shape at any time. One of these motes fell on Chen Changsheng's face. Luoluo stared at this mote of light and began to giggle. She was very happy because her teacher did not blame her, nor did he thank her. In order to make her happy, he even copied her words. Following that, Chen Changsheng used an hour and 3 large buckets of hot water to clean himself from head to toe. Then he and Luoluo went to the Li Palace. The Pope was waiting for him in the Li Palace. It was not the Great Hall of Light, but that quiet side hall. The light in the hall was very dim. Only the tender green of the green leaf in the pot leapt into one's eyes. Then he saw the divine staff carelessly placed on the wall, saw that clear pond and that magnificent crystal throne, as well as that indescribable yin-yang crown on the throne. Finally, he saw that old man dressed in hemp garments. Different from the fanatical worship of the believers of the world, the Supreme Pope seemed just like an ordinary old man. He was not even as eye-catching as those external objects like the divine staff or the divine crown. Seeing the Pope's back as he watered the green leaf, Chen Changsheng's thoughts were somewhat disorderly. Everyone knew that he was the Pope's chosen successor, and some powerful figures even knew that he was the Pope's martial nephew. To put another way, he had always been the Pope's sole successor in this world. But the problem was that he had only met the Pope twice. He was truly not familiar with the Pope, and it was even more difficult to say that he was close. The Pope took out a handkerchief and wiped his hands, then turned around and smiled at him. I remember that Su Li is very fond of gourmet food. Following him, did you eat anything good? The Pope's expression was clearly so amiable, his voice so gentle, as if an elder was asking a junior who had returned from a long journey. And in order to not make the junior too nervous, he had asked a very trivial question at the beginning. But Chen Changsheng felt as if a great mountain that spanned across the heavens and earth was pressing down on him. From the snowy plains of the land of demons to Xuanyang City, many people wanted to kill Su Li. Behind those people stood a lofty figure that seemed like a god. It was the Pope. But Su Li had survived, to a large extent, because of Chen Changsheng. Thus, he could not help but think that the Pope's words had some hidden meaning, so he could not help but be nervous. This nervousness is probably the nervousness of paying respects to my father-in-law. Tomorrow, there'll be 2 chapters. Chapter 429. In the eyes of the common people, the Pope's trust and love towards Chen Changsheng was at its peak, even somewhat baffling. Logically speaking, Chen Changsheng should naturally act according to the Pope's will. But in reality, from the military stronghold to Xuanyang City, Chen Changsheng had done many things that went against the Pope's will. No matter how one looked at it, the Pope should have been very disappointed, or at least asked for a reason. The Pope did not ask. He calmly looked at Chen Changsheng and said, "It's really hard to imagine that my senior brother would raise a student like you." Chen Changsheng was stunned. He suddenly realized that his impression of his master was actually very vague. Just what sort of person was his master? In the Pope's view, what sort of student should he raise? He did not know the answer, but he was very sure that the Pope's words were correct because he had never been raised by his master. He had been raised by his senior brother. Thinking of Xining Village's old temple, the fog behind the mountain, and those voices within the fog, and his senior brother and the wildflowers, he was somewhat entranced. The Pope looked at him and calmly smiled, thinking to himself, at this sort of time, anyone would be nervous, but this little fellow actually had the leisure to think of other things truly extraordinary. "Sit," he said to Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng grunted, very obediently sitting on the chair. not leaning against the back of the chair, nor deliberately only touching his buttocks. In short, he was truly obedient, without any deliberate actions. The Pope pointed at the teapot. Shang understood, picked up the teapot and filled the teacup in front of the Pope, thought a little, then filled the teacup in front of him, then began to wander again. Because he thought of those 2 nights in the Hunter Herb Garden, that little table, that woman who sat across from him and drank tea without saying a word. The Pope put down the teacup and casually said, "Tell me about the Garden of Zhou." He spoke casually, and what he wanted to hear was also casually said, because one thing was certain. The Garden of Zhou did not have Su Li. In the Garden of Zhou, I met a girl, Shang subconsciously said. The Pope was startled and asked him. Only then did Changsheng wake up from his stupor. He felt his face heat up and hurriedly recounted the events of the Garden of Zhou in detail. From the moment he obtained the yellow paper umbrella from the Wenshui Tangs, all the way to Zhou Dufu's mausoleum, he basically left nothing out. Only a few details that had nothing to do with the major events, such as the girl, he naturally did not mention them. Furthermore, for some unknown reason, he did not mention the having blade style in the mausoleum of Zhou or those lost heavenly tome monoliths. Sunlight seeped through the eaves of the hall and fell on the smooth, jade-like floor, illuminating the floor into many squares like a chessboard. The Pope sat in his chair and looked at the ground in silence for a long time. The mausoleum of Zhou, the heaven-shrouding sword, the yellow paper umbrella, Mount Li, the sword pool, the monster tide. This story that spanned several hundred years, the destiny between the 2 worlds, even he could not help but sigh ruefully. So, the sword pool is the sword sea, the plains of the unsetting sun. That person's grave is also inside. The Pope's voice resounded in the quiet hall. As the supreme saint of the human world, his grasp of this world far surpassed the imagination of ordinary people. But only today did he realize that the plains he had once seen many years ago actually concealed so many secrets. The black nightmare sarcophagus in the mausoleum of Zhou is empty. Changsheng naturally would not forget this very important detail. The Pope smiled in silence. That person's life and death were a mystery to many people. But time was still the most powerful thing in the world. At this point in time, he no longer cared much about it. In comparison, the Pope was more concerned about other matters. In that case, those swords are all in your hands. Without the slightest hesitation, Changsheng took the dagger from his waist and offered it up with both hands. Back in the Plum Garden Inn, Tang 36 had wanted to take his dagger, but had been refused. But now he could not refuse, because the Pope was the Pope and also his martial uncle. The fact that the swords in the sword pool were in his hands was also impossible to conceal. Back in the wilderness, when he fought with divine General Shui, those swords had already appeared. Do you know what this sheath is? The Pope did not take the dagger, but looked at him and asked. Changsheng shook his head. The Pope was somewhat sorrowful, saying, this was the Orthodox Academy's cornerstone treasure. Later on, it disappeared amidst that blood and fire. As it turns out, it was taken away by your master. Changsheng didn't know what to say. Senior and I were schoolmates, and also from the same sect. Now that I think about it, his talent in cultivation and intelligence have always been far above mine. But in the end, it was I who inherited the position of Pope, and he who went to the Orthodox Academy to become principal. The Pope gazed at the sky outside the hall, the sea of stars in his eyes slowly appearing and disappearing, like clouds in time. Because his obsession was too strong. Don't learn from him. Changsheng still didn't know what to say. Even today, he still did not know the true inside story of the Orthodox Academy. Even if he knew, he still had no right to speak. What about those swords in the sword pool? The Li Palace will send out an edict to the world. Those sects that still have descendants, first register them and then return the swords to them. As for those sects whose lineage has already been severed, those swords will be for your own safekeeping. Changsheng understood that with this arrangement, after the Mausoleum of Books, he could be considered to have performed a great service for the human world. The criticism brought about by the deaths of Liang Xiaoxiao and Zhuang Huanyu would be greatly alleviated. He said, "Everything will be as your holiness has arranged." He did not respectfully address him as your holiness, did not pull on his sleeve and call him martial uncle, only softly saying your holiness was already some sort of progress that allowed him to finally return to the natural and intimate world of his sect. The Pope was very satisfied. He said to him, "Go, have a good rest." Seeing his expression, the Pope understood what he was worried about and said, "Jeshio will come out very quickly." From start to finish, the Pope had not asked him a single question about Su Li. Returning to the capital for the first time, how could he have a good rest? Leaving the Li Palace, he could not return to the Orthodox Academy, nor could he visit Jishio. So Qin Changshan was taken by priest Xian to the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. The row of red maple trees should have been like fire, but in the late spring and early summer, they were a dense green that surpassed jade. It was as if the building behind the maple trees had the dual identity of the Imperial Court's educational institution and the Orthodoxy's Hall of Cultural Glory. In the deepest part of the hall, in that room filled with plum blossoms, Meletius sat behind a table, his eyes closed as if he was not asleep. The age spots on his face were even more distinct, just like the rouge plum on the table. Chun Changsheng stood in front of the table, separated by the rouge plum, looking at the Archbishop with a rather complex mood. Compared to the Pope, Archbishop Meletia did not have any relationship with him. Logically, he should have been even more unfamiliar with him, but for some reason, he had always felt that the Archbishop had treated him extremely well. Whether it was the Grand Examination or the Garden of Zhou, Archbishop Meletia had provided him with far too much assistance and convenience. Although there were times when these matters would make him feel rather pressured, the true reason for his complex mood was not this, but that the Archbishop was growing old. Qin Changsheng did not know what level of cultivation Archbishop Meletia was at, but based on his qualifications and influence in the orthodoxy that could rival the Pope, as well as the attitude of Zhu Luo and the others towards him, he should be able to guess that he was not far from the divine domain. Priests of this level were the same as other cultivators. It was very common for them to live past 800 years. In this endless period of time, even if experts of profound cultivation gradually grew old, they would only have a few wrinkles on their faces and beards. They would definitely not show any signs of weakness or old age. Only at the final stage of their lives would they consider the question of descendants, leave behind a bloodline, and then rapidly age at an unimaginable speed. Death like the quiet beauty of an autumn leaf. No, it was more like a fruit falling from a fierce gale. In this 1 year, the entire continent knew that Archbishop Meletia was growing old. This signified that the Archbishop's days in this world were numbered. At any moment, he could return to the sea of stars. The rouge plum blossom was so gorgeous. The plum blossoms in the room did not seem to be in the depths of spring, but rather any time of the 4 seasons, any time of the year when the plum blossoms were in full bloom. Compared to the room filled with flowers, the Archbishop's old age was all the more startling. Qin Changsheng felt somewhat sad. Just at this moment, the Archbishop opened his eyes, smiled at him, and said, "Come here." Qin Changsheng obeyed and walked in front of him. Meletia looked at him and sighed ruefully. "Knowing that you are still alive, I am very happy, but at the same time, I also feel somewhat sad." Qin Changsheng did not understand these words, but for some reason, he suddenly felt a great deal of unease, even fear. Since Su Li is not dead, then I still have to withdraw my gaze and place on the capital, just like how you still have to return to the capital in the end. Meletia said, "The Boiling Stone Summit is next year. I don't know if I can still see it, but I can at least finish watching you for this year." Qin Changsheng wanted to say some words of comfort, but he realized that he was not good at it. Somewhat remorsefully, he lowered his head. Meletia calmly looked at him and said, "This year is very important to you." Qin Changsheng said, "I don't understand. You have to mature as quickly as possible." After saying this, Meletia's expression became somewhat heavy, his eyes somewhat gloomy, but then they became as bright as ever. "Believe me, in the end, you and we will obtain victory." Qin Changsheng truly did not understand. He thought to himself, with whom is this battle? With the divine empress? Even if it is, what strength do I have to participate in a battle of this level? The problem between the orthodoxy and the empress is still that position in the imperial palace. With some difficulty, Mei Lisha stood up and brought Chun Changsheng to the window. Gazing in the direction of the nearby imperial palace, he said, "In this battle, you will play an extremely important role." Chun Changsheng said, "Just because I am teacher's student? Because I represent the attitude of supporting the imperial clan?" Mei Lisha ruefully said, "Of course it's not just this." The archbishop did not give a more detailed explanation, because this matter was very difficult to explain, perhaps even impossible to explain. It was also because at this moment, the door to the room was knocked on at just the right time. After the door was pushed open, a person that Chun Changsheng had not expected to appeared. Before 8 o'clock in the next chapter. Chapter 430. The person who came was Prince Chun Lu, the only representative of the Chun imperial family in the capital, and also the only junior that the divine queen could accept. Prince Chun Lu's reputation in the capital had always been excellent. He was thought to be as gentle as jade, but also very courageous. Back then, this young prince had helped Chun Changsheng and the Tradition Academy twice, so Chun Changsheng had a very good impression of him. But for some reason, Tang 36 didn't like him. Prince Chun Lu bowed to the archbishop, then looked at Chun Changsheng and smiled. "Don't you think this meeting is a bit too early?" Mei Lisha didn't care about the hidden meaning of these words and directly said, "The orthodoxy wants the queen to express her attitude as soon as possible." The people of the Tianhai family naturally won't agree. Tianhai Sheng Shui is a smart person, but not everyone in his family has his wisdom. Even if they do, they will be crushed by the throne that seems to be within their reach. After all, not everyone can resist that kind of temptation. Prince Chun Lu said seriously, "As members of the Chun imperial family, I and my brothers from the counties will act righteously." These two words were both said to Chun Changsheng. The orthodoxy has always stood behind the imperial family. It has always been like this since the time of Emperor Taizu. Mei Lisha continued, "It is still the same now. But because of Zhuang Huanyu's death, there might be some problems on the side of the Heavenly Academy. Among the 6 archbishops, there are still 2 that haven't changed because the Pope changed too quickly." Chun Changsheng thought to himself, if this is the case, then what happened in the Tradition Academy a dozen years ago? Why did the Pope support the Divine Queen for so many years? He understood that this was an analysis of the current situation, but he still didn't understand what he could do. What was the meaning of the Archbishop arranging for him to meet with Prince Chun Lu? Mei Lisha's next words revealed the answer to the riddle, but it was a new riddle. For both Chun Changsheng and Prince Chun Lu who heard this, it was the same. "Your Highness, please remember what Chun Changsheng has sacrificed in the future." Prince Chun Lu listened thoughtfully, but he couldn't think of anything. Chun Changsheng couldn't think of anything, so he thought of something else and asked, "What about Zhixio?" The Pope said that Zhixio would come out soon, but he was still very worried. Zhixio was still in the Great Prison. He couldn't imagine what kind of terrible torture the Wolf Clan youth had endured during this period of time. Mei Lisha said, "If the imperial court still doesn't release him, in a few days, I will personally pay a visit." Prince Chun Lu looked at him and said apologetically, "On the second day after Zhixio was imprisoned, I handed over my name card, but you also know that this prince doesn't have much influence in front of Lord Zhoutong." Standing among the maple trees, overflowing with spring, Chun Changsheng gazed in the rumored direction of Zhou prison, then in the direction of the Mausoleum of Books, and finally in the direction of the Imperial Palace and the Li Palace. He sighed. He wasn't an ordinary youth, but he was still a youth in the end. There were some things in the world that were too complicated and too heavy for him to bear. It was even to the extent that he found it difficult to breathe. Compared to the capital, he actually felt that the storm in Xuanyang City was a little more refreshing and direct. He would rather stand together with that blade and simply do a few things, even if those things were not simple. Under the humble gazes of the priests, he left the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. He did not return to the Orthodox Academy, but instead went to the market to buy some food. Afterwards, he went to New North Bridge. Borrowing the flash of the setting sun, his body became illusory and he jumped into that dried-up well. The underground space was still bone-chilling, but the black dragon was sleeping. Its massive body, like that of a mountain range, quietly lay on the ground. The chain was still rusted to death in the stone wall. Chun Changsheng took out the meat and placed them on lotus leaves in front of the black dragon. Finally, he took the rui from his waist and placed it on the ground. The black dragon's spiritual soul was still sleeping in the rui, and it was unknown when it would wake up. After doing all this, he thought it over, then wrote a few words on the frost on the ground and left. Leaving the pond, his body was drenched. After changing into the dry clothes that he had prepared, he once more saw the black goat in the courtyard of the imperial palace. He smiled, bent his knees, and hugged it affectionately. He completely disregarded the black goat's slightly raised head and its unwilling appearance. There was a gust of wind. The chill was still there, but it was driven several dozen zhang away. The lotus leaves on the frost regained their tender green, and the fresh meat once more began to emit heat. The Tianhai Divine Empress held her hands behind her back and lowered her head to read the words that Chun Changsheng had just left on the frost. A mocking smile appeared on her lips. She did not even glance at it. With a slight push of her spiritual sense, the jade rui returned to her waist. The spiritual soul of the black dragon thus awoke, transforming into a clear and cold intent. Through the red mole between its brows, it returned to the dragon's body. The dragon's eyes slowly opened, snow rustling down. The mountainous dragon body began to shrink with unimaginable speed, ultimately transforming into that black-clothed girl. However, the coldness on its face had already been greatly diluted by that cinnabar mole. Do you see? Men are all fickle and lacking in loyalty, the Tianhai Divine Empress jeered at her. The black-clothed girl saw those words. After a moment of silence, she said, "He doesn't know when I'll wake up. He has something to do, so he naturally leaves first. Moreover, he doesn't know that I'm a girl. You are a female dragon," the Tianhai Divine Empress calmly said. "What meaning is there in letting him know this fact?" The black-clothed girl was very angry, the baleful aura on her brow greatly increasing. The temperature of the underground space rapidly dropped. The Tianhai Divine Empress did not care. The area several dozen zhang in circumference around her was still as warm as spring, and the ground by her feet even began to emit specks of green. In the world above the well, it was already early summer. At dusk, there was a hint of summer heat. Business in the distant ice shop had improved, but this place was very cold and cheerless because there were many guards scattered around, and also because of the two terrifying snow mastiffs under the trees and the grass. Mou held the rope in her hand and quietly waited. When the Divine Empress's figure reappeared, she immediately walked over and said, "Prince Shenlu also went to the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education." The Divine Empress glanced at her and asked, "What do you want to say?" Mou replied, "I don't understand. Even if Chun Changsheng is Taoist Ji's student, how could he be worthy of the orthodoxy's attention? Could it be some sort of smokescreen?" This sort of incomprehension was a question that she, as a subject and advisor, had to immediately raise, but perhaps she herself did not realize it. This would also cause the Empress to lower her guard against Chun Changsheng. The Divine Empress said, "The actions of the orthodoxy's people are best for them to deliberately mystify things. There is no need to pay attention to them." After saying this, she walked towards the imperial city. The two snow mastiffs silently left the tree and followed behind her. Looking at the Empress's back, Mou smiled bitterly, thinking, if there really is no need to pay attention, then why did the Empress follow Chun Changsheng right after he came to see the black dragon? Her incomprehension was because she did not know of the agreement between the Divine Empress and the black dragon, did not know of the existence of the jade rui. Returning to the imperial palace, she looked at the pond in front of her and thought that Chun Changsheng should have come out from here. The Divine Empress then thought of that night even earlier, the scene of Chun Changsheng emerging from the pond for the first time, that youth did not care that he was in the dangerous depths of the imperial palace. Seeing a flower pot knocked over by a startled squirrel about to injure a woman, he charged over. A mocking smile appeared on the divine empress's face again, but it always felt like a senior mocking a junior. Her spirit slightly moved. The jade rui left her belt and floated above the pond. The water in the pond moved as if it was boiling, giving rise to a lot of mist. A ray of light shot out from the jade rui and fell on the mist. The scene gradually became clearer. It was the scene that the black dragon saw after leaving the capital with Chun Changsheng. Later on, her soul often slept in the rui, and when the rui was tied to Chun Changsheng's waist or wrist, it would also record the scene. Looking at the scene, the divine empress became quieter and quieter. Her smile did not disappear, but the mocking intent decreased a lot. What was left was some kind of interest. The scene flipped quickly and gradually became flowing light. It was many times faster than the normal speed of time. Only a saint like her could see it clearly. When the golden phoenix wings lit up the night sky and the scene of the heavily injured girl in white appeared, the divine empress raised her eyebrows. For the first time, she expressed some kind of concern. Su Yurong was her most beloved junior. Although she disguised herself, it could not be hidden from her eyes. In the following scene, Su Yurong and Chun Changsheng met, but they did not recognize each other. She smiled without saying a word, probably finding it very interesting. Finally, she saw the unsetting sun at the edge of the plains, the wild tide of monsters, Su Yurong's inseparability, Chun Changsheng's unabandonment, and that person's mausoleum. The smile on her face gradually disappeared. She silently gazed at the mausoleum of Zhou in the scene. After an unknown amount of time, the scene darkened and everything disappeared without a trace. She lightly waved her hand, returning the scene to the place where Su Yurong and Chun Changsheng first met, which was also the place where the misunderstanding began. That place was on the Reed Island by the lake. The two met but did not recognize each other. The Rui could not record Su Yurong's thoughts, but the divine empress clearly knew what she was thinking at the time. Why was it that after that, she never connected the unconscious fellow with Chun Changsheng, who was on the other side of the engagement? No matter who looked at it, Chun Changsheng did not seem like a 15-year-old youth. He was too calm and steady, even when he was unconscious. At the time, when Su Yurong glanced over, she felt that this person was around 20 years old. Then, how could he be Chun Changsheng? The divine empress stood by the pond for a very long time, thinking about something. Suddenly, she looked at Su Yurong in the scene and said, "So you also felt that he did not seem like a 15-year-old youth?" The night wind rustled the grass. At some point, a chief eunuch had arrived outside the hall. She asked, "How is it?" The chief eunuch reported in a low voice, "There are no new clues in the case." Lord Zhou also did not discover anything in Xining village. Only that mad lord who the imperial astronomer still insists that Crown Prince Xiaoming is not dead. He had followed the divine empress for several hundred years and experienced countless great events. Yet when he mentioned the words of that mad lord who, his voice still began to tremble uncontrollably. The divine empress gazed at the place in the night sky where a certain star should have been. For a very long time, she did not speak. The title of this chapter was decided upon together with the leader, slightly praising. Chapter 431. The Crown Prince was the natural successor to the throne. If the great Zhou had a crown prince, perhaps the conflict between the orthodoxy and the divine empress would not have developed to its current level. The situation on the continent would have been much calmer. In reality, the great Zhou truly did once have a crown prince. He was the son of Emperor Xian and the divine empress, Crown Prince Xiaoming. Alas, none of the successive crown princes of the great Zhou had a good ending. The crown prince that Taizu had established died tragically in the coup of the 100 Herb Garden, and the crown prince that Emperor Taizong had meticulously raised was ultimately executed for some inexplicable rebellion. This crown Prince Xiaoming's fate was also very unfortunate, but it could also be said that he was relatively lucky because he had already died when he was very young. Not long after Emperor Xian's death, Crown Prince Xiaoming died of illness in his swaddling clothes. But no one believed it. Of course, no one believed it. The bloodline of the imperial clan and the divine empress was compatible. So how could it be a premature child? As for the cause of Crown Prince Xiaoming's death, there were countless theories. There was one that was the most widespread. Back then, the Chun imperial clan allied with the orthodoxy's old powers, intending to drive the divine empress from the throne. In that soul-stirring struggle, the divine empress and the pope obtained the final victory. Several hundred nobles of the Chun imperial clan were either executed or exiled, and the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy were nearly wiped out. All that was left were the desolate frosty grass and broken wells and crumbling walls. However, the divine empress had also paid an enormous price for this. In that rebellion, Crown Prince Xiaoming was poisoned to death by the divine empress's enemies. There is another theory that was also extremely widespread, but it could not be heard in tea houses or inns. It could only be restlessly spread in the dark. This theory was even crueler, even more callous. There were people who believed, and even secretly spread, that several hundred years ago, the divine empress was expelled from the imperial palace by Emperor Taizong and spent her days in misery in the 100-herb garden. She became acquainted with the Pope and the previous principal of the Orthodox Academy, and learned of the secret of defying the heavens and changing fate. She swore to the starry sky that she was willing to sever her bloodline in exchange for defying the heavens and changing fate. The death of Crown Prince Xiaoming was the curse of her defying the heavens and changing fate, or perhaps the wrath of the heavens. It was even possible that it was something that she had done on her own initiative in order to defy the heavens and change fate. In those dark rumors, the narrators seem to have seen with their own eyes that bloody and frightening scene in the imperial palace. They described it vividly, how the divine empress's hand passed through the swaddling clothes and extended towards the incessantly crying infant. There was no expression on her beautiful and dignified face, but a single tear rolled down from the corner of her eye. Then the crying gradually quieted, and the silence of the night palace made one's heart palpitate. If the divine empress had triggered the wrath of the heavens when she defied the heavens and changed her fate, causing her to end her line and die alone, the heavenly Tao and the sea of stars were truly too cruel and terrifying. If the divine empress, in order to change her fate, had personally killed her only son and wanted to become a loner on this continent, then she was a little too callous and terrifying. Regardless of the explanation, Crown Prince Xiaoming was already dead. He had died for a cruel and terrifying reason, his death very innocent and pitiful. From then on, no one dared to mention this matter, not the Chun imperial clan or the people of the orthodoxy. Only that insane imperial astronomer who, even though Zhou Tong had plucked out all his fingernails, still used his blood-stained mouth to tell the world that Crown Prince Xiaoming was not dead. Then, just when Zhou Tong was prepared to pluck out this Lord Hu's tongue, the divine empress showed her benevolence and allowed Lord Hu to return to his hometown to rest. But in the view of many people, this was not benevolence, but a guilty conscience, or perhaps a form of self-consolation. Just what had happened in the imperial palace back then? Just how had Crown Prince Xiaoming died? Why had the empress felt guilty? Thus, that cruel and terrifying explanation spread even more widely. Of course, it was still spread deep into the night. The imperial palace was very quiet at night, but the night of early summer was infinitely cold. The chief eunuch lowered his head, not even daring to glance at the divine empress. The quiet courtyard instantly transformed into a frigid plain of snow. Not a single snowflake could be seen, but a thin layer of ice gradually began to form on the surface of the pond. A saint's thoughts moved the heavens and earth. Their emotions surged, creating raging waves. Their moods were gloomy, and the curtain of night hung over the sky. Their moods were gloomy yet violent, and naturally, wind and snow covered the sky. Just when the chief eunuch felt like his sea of consciousness was about to be frozen and split apart, the divine empress's voice finally rang out once more. Her voice was very calm, very light, like the water in a pond beneath a thin layer of ice. All the people of the world are my sons. The Prince of Xiang and the Elephant King are also my sons. Xiaoming's life and death have never been important. It had never been important, so it was possible that it had never been important. The chief eunuch lowered his head even more, as if his head was about to touch the cold ground. He gradually retreated into the darkness. A black goat slowly walked over from outside the garden, its fur as glossy and pitch black as jade. As it walked out of the darkness, it seemed to bring with it a part of the darkness. Was everything covered up by the darkness the truth? Then what about the darkness itself? The divine empress impassively asked it. Then what about you? Why are you willing to get close to him? Just who is he? Tonight was Chun Changxing's first night after returning to the Orthodox Academy. Just like on the previous nights, after eating dinner and taking a stroll along the lake, he very naturally walked into the library. Luo Luo had returned to the Li Palace. Tang 36 was still in the mausoleum of books. Xian Yuanpo was smashing trees, and Zhuxiu was still in Zhou prison. He didn't know what he should do, so he just continued cultivating. The starlight pierced through the glass, and the snowflakes pierced through the sparse leaves. They did not stop on his clothes or skin, but directly entered into the depths of his body. The layer of snow on the plains grew thicker and thicker. Although the lake outside the Spirit Mountain was still far from becoming a vast ocean, the flow of water had already increased significantly. The stone gate of the ethereal palace at the end of the sloping stone steps in the mountain had already been completely opened. Calm and gentle rays of light seeped out from the cave and scattered everywhere in the water, giving off a very peaceful feeling. The current him would naturally not be as perplexed as before, thinking that all the starlight had gone elsewhere. He quietly sensed his own star in the distant starry sky, sensed the changes in his body. Time slowly passed. At some point, he opened his eyes and woke up. He began to sort through his gains from the past few days. When he left the mausoleum of books, he was already at the upper level of ethereal opening. After his journey to the Garden of Zhou and his encounter with so many powerful foes on his journey south, his sword heart was gradually becoming more complete, and his cultivation was even more stable. He was even faintly on the verge of climbing to the peak of ethereal opening. Coupled with the fact that he had followed Su Li for so long, his progress in swordplay was even greater. With the two added together, he could be said to be invincible under the star condensation realm. Even if he encountered those experts who had just entered the star condensation realm, he still had a chance of defeating them. This fact made him feel somewhat gratified, but he would not relax in the slightest, because he had never forgotten that night. He truly did not have much time. Even if he could be said to be the fastest person in history to reach the peak of ethereal opening, there was still an endless distance from the distant concealed divinity realm. Just how much more time would he need? As a result, he had to treasure his time. After concluding his meditation, purification, and meditation, he immediately began to practice his swordplay. The snowy plains and the lake water in his body indicated that he had already accumulated an extremely large amount of true essence, far surpassing that of ordinary cultivators of the same age. The problem was that his meridians were broken, so he could not completely utilize that true essence. The blazing sword that Su Li had taught him could only resolve a portion of this problem, and the price that the blazing sword had to pay was far too great. With his current level of cultivation, he could only use 3 strikes at most. Moreover, the blazing sword could not be practiced. It was harmful to the body. The intellectual sword could not be practiced either. It was harmful to the mind. He could only practice the stupid sword. He stood on the floor, constantly drawing the sword, holding it horizontally, and constantly repeating this simple and tedious process. It truly did seem rather clumsy. After finishing 1,000 times, he once more sat down cross-legged and sent his spiritual sense into the sheath. In the world of the sheath, there were 10,000 broken swords calmly floating in the air, not disturbing each other. These swords no longer possessed the power they had when they had first appeared in the Garden of Zhou, but they were still divine swords whose names had once shaken the continent. Their sword intents were still powerful, and the seemingly empty space had long since been occupied by sword intents. His spiritual sense passing through the 10,000 sword intents was actually a very dangerous matter, especially since he was not attempting to use his spiritual sense to control the 10,000 swords, but to directly use his spiritual sense to interact with the 10,000 swords. He wanted to use the sword intents of the 10,000 swords to sharpen his sword heart. His sword heart was already perfectly fused. If others were to know of this, they would assuredly sigh in shock and praise, because this was an extremely difficult matter. Taking another step forward was the true enlightened sword heart. However, the enlightened sword heart required too much talent in the path of the sword. Across the entire continent, there were only a few people who could achieve the true enlightened sword heart. The problem was that in this period of time, Chen Changsheng had only met two people who had achieved the enlightened sword heart, Su Li and Lady Chu Jian, so he naturally could not be satisfied. Those sword intents were the whetstones, and his spiritual sense was the edge of the sword. The sword intents, whether sharp or tyrannical, constantly touched, grinded, and cut against his spiritual sense. This process was very painful. He closed his eyes and did not sweat, but his face gradually paled. The edge of a treasured sword was sharpened, and the fragrance of a plum blossom came from the bitter cold. Without experiencing the wind and rain, how could one see the rainbow? He thought of the famous sayings of his predecessors and endured the unimaginable pain, all the way until that strand of spiritual sense that had entered the sheath grew thinner and thinner, weaker and weaker, as if it could dissipate at any moment. Suddenly, he sensed that behind the 10,000 sword intents, there was something that was attracting his spiritual sense. The moment he sensed that attractive force, his originally weak and gradually dissipating spiritual sense suddenly became much more stable, once more powerful. His spiritual sense passed through the 10,000 sword intents and slowly drifted into the distance. After some time, the light boat finally passed through the 10,000 mountains, and his spiritual sense arrived at the other shore of the ocean of sword intents. The shore of the ocean of sword intents turned out to be a real shore. On the shore was a black stone monolith, but it was not a real monolith, only a phantom. The black monolith was rather familiar, just like the darkness of the night. The moment he saw the black monolith, Chen Changsheng naturally had a feeling that this monolith shadow should be a door that led to another place. What world was on the other side of the black monolith? What was behind the darkness of the night? Suddenly, he remembered. The reason why this black monolith was familiar was not because he could see it every night, but because this black monolith was exactly the same as the heavenly tome monolith that he had obtained from Wang Jitze in the pavilion of ascending mist. It was also the same as the heavenly tome monoliths around the mausoleum of Zhou. Could it be that this black monolith led to the Garden of Zhou? Could it be that the Garden of Zhou had still not been destroyed? There will be a second chapter, but it will be much later. Chapter 432. Thinking of the plain in the Garden of Zhou, the Sunset Valley, and the Taoist scriptures and old objects lost in the lake, Chen Changsheng was both astonished and pleasantly surprised. When he came out of the Garden of Zhou, he had no idea what had happened. Looking at it from another angle, he had no idea how he had left the Garden of Zhou and suddenly appeared in the snowy plains of the demon realm tens of thousands of li away. Because he did not know about the metal plate in Black Robe's hand, he had no idea what had happened in the Garden of Zhou afterwards. He had only heard about it from Hua Jiefu and the others on the road. If the Garden of Zhou had not been destroyed, did that not mean that the heavenly tome monolith stolen by Zhou Dufu could see the light of day again? Yes, the most important and most precious object in the Garden of Zhou was not the mausoleum, nor was it the magical artifacts lost by the predecessors, nor was it the roasted chicken, roasted lamb, silver, and books that he had thrown into the lake during his battle with Nang's two maids. Of course, it was the heavenly tome monoliths. No, Chen Changsheng froze and thought of a possibility. He suddenly realized that the most precious object in the Garden of Zhou was not the heavenly tome monoliths. At least him. If Lady Chu Jian could not leave the Garden of Zhou, then was she still in the Garden of Zhou? If the Garden of Zhou had not been destroyed, did that not mean that she might still be alive? Was she in there right now? He knew that the possibility was extremely small, but since he thought of this possibility, he did not hesitate at all. His spiritual sense directly charged towards the image of the black monolith. A huge boom resounded in his sea of consciousness. His strand of spiritual sense suddenly turned into countless strands of green smoke and disappeared without a trace. He woke up in the library of the Orthodox Academy. His sea of consciousness was shaken, and he was in incomparable pain. He was so vexed that he wanted to vomit. Only after a very long time did the painful feeling gradually subside. Without hesitation, Chun Changsheng once again sent a strand of his spiritual sense into the sheath, requesting for the 10,000 swords to open a path. In an instant, he once again arrived at the other end of the ocean of sword intent. Yet, there was nothing there. The 10,000 swords obeyed and opened path. The sword intent had vanished, so there was naturally no ocean of sword intent. Without an ocean, how could there be another shore? Without a shore, there would naturally not be a black monolith on the shore waiting for his arrival. Chun Changsheng thought about it and gave up his control over the swords. As a result, the extremely sharp sword intent once again filled the space, and the ocean reappeared. His spiritual awareness once again passed through the ocean of sword wills with great difficulty. He arrived at the opposite shore, saw the black stone tablet, and then descended. As expected, his wisp of soul consciousness was destroyed, and he woke up again. Chun Changsheng was silent for a long time. Then he stood up and walked out of the library. Tonight, he had consumed too much of his divine sense and could not support another attempt. To suppress the urge to rediscover the Garden of Zhou, to find those heavenly tome monoliths, and the intense impulse that she brought was an extremely difficult task. Even if he was the most resistant to temptation and the most rational youth in the world, it was still very difficult for him to endure. There were some things that Chun Changsheng could no longer endure. It was that he had not bathed in many days. From the time he entered the Garden of Zhou to the 10,000-li journey south, there had been no time for him to wash. Thus, after returning to the Orthodox Academy today, he did not do anything else. He first used 3 large buckets of hot water and an hour to carefully wash himself from head to toe, from inside to outside. But even so, he still felt that he had not washed himself clean. Returning to the house, he washed himself 2 more times. After confirming that there was not a speck of dirt, he gripped the dragoncry sword and began to cut his hair, shave his beard, trim his fingernails until they were slightly round, trim his toenails until they were square, and then change into clean clothes. Only then did he feel somewhat more comfortable. Walking to the window, he once more glanced at Zhou Prison and the Mausoleum of Books. After saying a few words of greeting to Zhexiu and Tang 36, he went to bed and began to sleep. By now, it was already late at night. At 5 in the morning, he promptly woke up. There was a faint smell in the room. It was not the smell of cosmetics, nor was it the fragrance of flowers, but it smelled very comfortable. A strand of black hair rested on the side of his pillow. Presumably, Mou had come. Chun Changsheng was somewhat perplexed. Did I actually sleep so soundly last night? Or was it that Mou was even stronger than people imagined? It must be known that he was already a cultivator at the peak of ethereal opening. Even if Mou was at the star condensation realm, there was no reason for her to silently lie by his side for an entire night without him noticing. Of course, his current mood was still mostly because he was not used to it and felt that it was rather absurd. Mou was the most famous beauty of the Great Zhou dynasty. She was the woman with the second highest status in the Great Zhou dynasty. Moreover, they were enemies. He had just returned to the capital, but she did not even give him a single night of time. She wanted to stealthily come over and sleep. What was she doing? Outside the window, rain suddenly began to fall. It did not carry much of a chill, but the early summer had instantly returned to spring. Chun Changsheng gazed out the window and suddenly heard a loud noise coming from the direction of the academy's gate. Everything was somewhat familiar, just like that rainy morning when Tian Haixingxue had led the cavalry of the Great Zhou Northern Army and directly smashed apart the gate of the Orthodox Academy. In the rain this morning, who was it that had come? It was still someone from the Tian Hai family. It was not Tian Haixingxue, but it was someone that Chun Changsheng and Xian Yuan knew. Xian Yuan looked at the youngster sitting on the wheelchair. His emotions were somewhat complicated. Previously, his right arm was destroyed by this youngster. Logically speaking, he should have hated this youngster. But later on, this youngster was crippled by Princess Luo and was even more heavily injured than him. His right arm's injury had basically been healed by Chun Changsheng's treatment. The simple and honest youngster of the bear tribe couldn't really feel much hatred. Instead, he felt some sympathy. The one sitting in the wheelchair was Tian Haya, the young elite that once had a terrifying reputation in the capital. Of course, that was already in the past. Currently, Tian Haya's face was pale, his cheeks were slightly swollen, and the muscles on both of his legs were obviously atrophied. He had already become a cripple. Anyone who looked at this youngster, if they did not know the evil deeds he had done, would probably be like Xian Yuan and feel sympathy for him. But Tian Haya was a person that didn't need sympathy. He had never sympathized with others, and he didn't need sympathy from others. No matter to others or to himself, he was very cruel. Even if he was crippled, he wouldn't be willing to swallow his anger. Chun Changsheng, F***CK, your ancestors. When Chun Changsheng arrived at the gate of the Tradition Academy, the first sentence he heard was related to himself. Although until today, he didn't even know who his parents were, nor did he know where his ancestry was. But when he heard Tian Haya's shrill voice, he couldn't help but feel angry. The gate of the Tradition Academy was pushed open. In the morning rain, Chun Changsheng walked into 100 Blossom Street and began to face his enemies, just like last year. The stage play of Choosing Heaven will be performed from the 1st to the 9th of May in Shanghai's Yihai Theater. Tickets are currently on sale. Those who are interested can search for tickets on Baidu and purchase tickets on GualaLifeNet.com or Shanghai Cultural Information Net. You can also follow the Weibo of Choosing Heaven stage play and see the latest information on the sale of tickets. Just like everyone else, I am not very familiar with stage plays, but I still have a good hope that our story can be adapted into various forms of art. I hope everything goes well. Sincerely. Chapter 433. It had already been a year. There were no other new students in the Tradition Academy, but there were already new students. It was no longer the graveyard scene from before. The courtyard was still cold and cheerless, but the outside of the courtyard was heavily guarded. The priests of the Li Palace guarded the 100 Blossom Street. Even in the middle of the night, they did not leave. The common people could not even get close. However, when the priests looked at the youngster in the wheelchair, their eyes were filled with vigilance and loathing, but they could not do anything. This was because the position of the Tianhai family in the Zhou dynasty was too special, and also because Tianhai heir was now a cripple. Using the words of the Divine Empress, the people of the Orthodoxy should act mysteriously. In the eyes of the people of the Orthodoxy themselves, they should be reasonable and honorable. It was very difficult for them to take the initiative to attack a crippled youth. Besides this, there was another reason, and that was that there was a person standing next to Tianhai. That person was about 30 years old. He was tall and thin, and his face was gloomy and cold. The aura he exuded was very powerful. In the drizzle, Tianhai's sharp and venomous curses never stopped. That person always remained silent, not saying a word. He only quietly looked at the closed courtyard door, not knowing what he was thinking. The new gate of the Tradition Academy was pushed open from the inside. Chun Changsheng walked out and stood on the stone stairs. He looked at Tianhai, who was in the rain. He noticed at first glance that Tianhai didn't have an umbrella. The person standing beside the wheelchair also didn't have an umbrella for him. He looked at that person, guessing that this person shouldn't be Tianhai's bodyguard, but he didn't know where he came from. Chun Changsheng looked at Tianhai in the wheelchair again and said, "You should know why the elders in your family wanted you to come to the Tradition Academy and curse." Tianhai's face was soaked by the rain and appeared even paler, but his expression was still fierce and arrogant, and he became excited because of Chun Changsheng's appearance. "Of course I know." The youth's voice became sharper and sharper, and even seemed a little mournful, as if he was crying and laughing at the same time. I'm already a piece of trash, so of course I have to make good use of trash to seek sympathy. Moreover, the matter between us is just a matter between children. It's nonsense. Does your holiness have the nerve to say that my Tianhai clan is suppressing the principle of the Orthodox Academy? Chun Chong Sheng was silent for a while, then said, But I don't understand. What's the point of making a fuss like this? I can ignore you. Today was different from the past. At the gate of the Orthodox Academy, a bishop was leading several dozen priests and guards of the Li Palace, keeping the two people from the Tianhai clan at bay, let alone the wheelchair-bound Tianhai Yer. Even if Tianhai Shang Shui brought his cavalry back from Yangshui Pass, he still wouldn't be able to charge straight to the gate of the Orthodox Academy like last year. Tianhai Yer laughed, revealing a mouth full of fine white teeth, looking like a wounded cub, and said with a sharp voice, Did you not hear me cursing your family's 18 generations of ancestors? Chun Chong Sheng was silent for a while and said, And then? I have to curse 18 generations of your ancestors? Tian Tian in. Tian Tian. Family. Family. And he. Family. Academy. Chong School. And they world. Our academy. Long. You. Academy. Chun Tian. And he. Academy. Tian he. Chun Chun Long. And sect. Day. World. Then continue to curse. After saying this, Chun Chong Sheng turned around and walked towards the Tradition Academy. Before he pushed open the courtyard door, he heard Tianhai Yer insult his parents and ancestors. He was really very angry and was prepared to teach the Tianhai clan a lesson no matter what tricks they had up their sleeves, no matter what conspiracy they had. But when he really walked out of the courtyard door and saw the crippled youth on the wheelchair, he suddenly changed his mind. Tianhai Yer was cruel and cold-blooded. He used to be a scary person. Now he was crippled, but he was still scary. Scary because he had no shame, no respect, no pursuit, and now he didn't even have ambition. Right now, he was just a pile of mud. If Chun Chong Sheng and the Tradition Academy didn't want to be stuck in the mud and be slowed down, they could only ignore him. Or they could fill the mud with sand and stones. Since they couldn't kill Tianhai Yer, they didn't need to do anything else. Why should they listen to this? Looking at Chun Chong Sheng's back, Tianhai Yer was stunned. He became even angrier. He kept cursing with a sharp voice. All kinds of dirty words came out. Chun Chong Sheng didn't seem to hear anything. His footsteps didn't speed up or slow down. He walked steadily into the academy. Seeing this scene, the priests were both shocked and impressed. They thought to themselves, no wonder he is the Pope's most valued junior. No wonder he is the youngest principal of the Orthodox Academy. The man standing next to the wheelchair looked at Chun Chong Sheng's back. He raised his eyebrows. He seemed surprised, but then his surprise turned into disdain. Compared to his peers, Chun Chong Sheng was more mature. Or maybe he was more quiet and calm. He didn't look like a 16-year-old youngster. Xin Yuan looked older, but in reality, he was only a 14-year-old bear youngster. He didn't understand why Chun Chong Sheng could endure it. He asked angrily, That's it? Chun Chong Sheng looked at him and said, What else can I do? Kill him? Xin Yuan thought about it and said, It's not impossible. Chun Chong Sheng said, He's a member of the Tianhai clan. Unless the Li Palace personally issues an edict, no one can do anything. Besides, there's always someone following him. Didn't you see? Xin Yuan asked, Is that person strong? Chun Chong Sheng said, Star condensation stage. Xin Yuan took a deep breath. That tall and thin man didn't look more than 30 years old. He was actually a star condensation cultivator? But we can't just let Tianhai Yer curse outside, right? I have more important things to do. Yes, Chun Chong Sheng had more important things to do. Compared to that matter, the disgusting methods of the Tianhai clan and the evil intentions hidden behind the scenes weren't important. In the past, to him, the most important thing was obviously cultivation. But now, apart from cultivation, there was another thing. That was, in the process of sharpening his sword heart, he needed to reach the other shore of the ocean of sword intent. He needed to find that black monolith and confirm whether or not it was the path to the Garden of Zhou. If it was, he wanted to enter the Garden of Zhou again and take a look. His divine sense fell upon the shadow of the black monolith. In an instant, The terrifying energy contained within the monolith, an energy that didn't belong to this world, was shattered into thousands of tiny strands and turned into nothingness. A gust of wind suddenly swept through the library. Chi sprayed out from his body, lifting up his clothes and also stirring up a small amount of dust on the bookshelf. He made 3 consecutive attempts, all of which ended in failure. His face was as pale as the sheet of paper on Xiao Zhang's face. He could no longer endure the shock to his sea of consciousness and the backlash from that vigorous energy. He pushed open the door to the library and ran straight to the green grass by the lakeside. He clutched his chest and began to vomit, looking very wretched. Xin Yuan Po was smashing the tree when he saw this scene and was very shocked. He walked forward to support him and looked at the water stains on the grass and said worriedly, "Fortunately, we haven't eaten breakfast yet. Otherwise, it would be too disgusting." Chen Changsheng paid a lot of attention to the 3 meals a day. This morning, due to his impatience, he didn't eat breakfast. He still had to eat lunch and dinner, but he couldn't quite stomach it. His chest and abdomen were filled with disgust and discomfort. Whatever he ate was tasteless. This plate of boiled cauliflower. Did you forget to add salt? Xin Yuan Po felt wronged, thinking that in the entire Tradition Academy, I'm the only one who cooks, and yet you're still being so picky and picky to the point of being unreasonable. He angrily yelled, "You're the one who said to use less oil and salt when cooking." Chen Changsheng held the bowl of rice and said weakly, "Tonight, make some dishes with flavor." Xin Yuan Po looked at him and thought that he was probably really sick. Otherwise, how could he hear such words coming out of this guy's mouth? He asked, "Do you want Her Highness to come over and take a look?" Chen Changsheng shook his head. After all, Luo was a demi-human princess, her status far too sensitive. He did not wish for her to participate in the confrontation between the imperial court and the orthodoxy. The next morning, there was no rain, so the late spring turned back to early summer. The weather in the capital during May and June was always so unpredictable and hard to define. Tian Haiyer was also a person that was hard to define. He was once cold-blooded, bloodthirsty, and cruel. Relying on the power of the family of Tian Hai and his own talent in Xiaoxing, he committed all sorts of crimes. Later on, after he was beaten into a cripple by Luo, he disappeared for half a year. When he once again appeared in the eyes of the people of the capital, he showed a rare patience and perseverance, although what he did seemed to have nothing to do with these 2 words. The wheelchair rolled over the stone and arrived at the entrance of the Tradition Academy. The crippled youngster drank a mouthful of tea to moisten his throat. Under the strange gaze of the priests, he continued to curse. Yesterday, he had already cursed for a whole day. It seemed that today, the Tradition Academy would still be shrouded in those filthy words. But different from yesterday, today a lot of people of the capital came to watch. The people could not walk into the depths of the Hunter Blossom Street. They were blocked outside by the priests and the soldiers of the royal guards who came to maintain the order, but they could hear Tian Haiyer's curses clearly. Tian Haiyer's curses were actually nothing new. They were just cursing Chen Changsheng's elders, especially his female family members. Chen Changsheng, F***CK your mother. Chen Changsheng, I'm going to kill your daughter. Hearing these filthy words, the people outside of the street were discussing. They all shook their heads and didn't say anything. Although they were unhappy, no one dared to say anything. That skinny and tall man was still standing beside the wheelchair. He looked at the tightly shut gate of the Tradition Academy. No one knew what he was thinking. His lips still had that faint mocking smile. It seemed like he was laughing at Chen Changsheng's cowardice, but it also seemed like he had some other meaning. You really don't care? Even if you don't tell Her Highness, you should at least ask the central administration to deal with it. Xin Yuan Pa heard Tian Haiyer's curses coming from outside of the school. His face turned red. He looked at Chen Changsheng and said, Chen Changsheng said, when the gate of the Tradition Academy was smashed by the people sent by Tian Hai Xingxue, who repaired it in the end, Xin Yuan Pa thought he understood what he meant and asked, then what should we do next? Wait for a few more days. Chen Changsheng paused and said, wait for 3 more days. After saying that, He looked at the dim sky outside of the school. It was cloudy today. Once ignored, the days would go on as usual. The flow of time wouldn't change like the planes of the unsetting sun. A day passed very normally. Tianhaya Air blocked the gate of the Tradition Academy and cursed for 2 whole days. The Li Palace and the Education Board both kept silent. No news came out, but news came from the Mausoleum of Books. In 3 more days, a certain person would come out. Today I only have 1 chapter. Tonight I will accompany my wife to watch 7. Tomorrow there will be 2 chapters. I love you not for 2 or 3 days. I really like this song. When I was writing the chapter title, I kept humming it. 2 days later, Little Tang will come out. Actually, I don't know how to write about him. I just think he's very interesting. I like this kind of person, even though I can't do it. Chapter 434. On the morning of the 3rd day, Tianhaya Air and the tall and thin man punctually arrived at the gate of the Tradition Academy. Quite a few citizens of the capital had already arrived. 2 days ago, Chun Changsheng had used up a lot of his spiritual sense, but he still couldn't open the black monolith on the other side of the ocean of sword intent. Today, he decided to stop for a day. He sat in a library and began to read and study. Suddenly, a gust of wind arose, and then it rained. The sound of wind and rain, the sound of reading, and the sound of cursing outside the wall all rose and fell without disturbing each other. Qin Changsheng could achieve the state where nothing could disturb his mind, but other people couldn't. The citizens of the capital already had an extremely bad impression of the Tianhai family, and they didn't have any good impression of the infamous Tianhai Air. When it was noon, the citizens who were drenched in the rain realized that Tianhai Air's cursing was nothing new and returned to the beginning. Finally, they let out their first boos, followed by mocking laughter. Tianhaya Air sat in the wheelchair. His face became paler and his eyes more violent. He raised his right hand. Thus, the crowd clashed with the Tianhai family's entourage. The Li Palace clergy and the Imperial Guard arrived a little late. 2 commoners were injured, and one of the Tianhai family's entourage was beaten by the crowd until he was covered in blood. The Li Palace clergy was very angry. They demanded the Imperial Guard to immediately clean up 100 Flower Street. At the same time, they didn't wait for the result of the discussion and wanted to ask Tianhaya Air and that person to leave. At this moment, Tianhaya Air slapped his injured leg and mournfully yelled, "Murder! The Li Palace is powerful. They want to force people to death. They forced Liang Xiao to death, forced Zhuang Huanyu to death. Now, they want to force me to death. Come you, I want to see, after you force me to death, how will you explain to my aunt?" The Li Palace clergy were very angry, but they couldn't do anything to him. Ever since the Divine Empress took the place of the previous emperor to review memorials and manage the court, in the past 200 years, the Tianhai family had already replaced the Chun royal family and became the #1 family of the continent. Now, the Zhou court was filled with the descendants of the Tianhai family. The most important thing was all the juniors of the Tianhai family had the same aunt, the Divine Empress. Looking at the bright and dazzling plum blossoms in the room, and then at the tired bishop, Priest Exion's mood was somewhat complicated. He said, "If this goes on, it will be too embarrassing." Melisha slowly opened his eyes, looking at a certain place outside the window. In any case, the Tianhai clan has already lost face for so many years, they don't care. Priest Exion said, "How should we deal with it? If it really doesn't work, I'll bring people to drive Tianhai Air away." Melisha expressionlessly said, "Could it be that you still don't understand that this is a smokescreen? Illusion?" Priest Exion suddenly recalled the news that had come from the Li Palace. Slightly surprised, he asked, "Are you talking about the matter that the 2 archbishops brought up a few days ago? Within the Orthodoxy, there were the so-called 6 prefects. Whether it was in terms of seniority or status, Melisha was undoubtedly the head of the 6 prefects. However, the other 5 were also rather frightening figures. Mao Chuyu was no longer the principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy. He took over as Archbishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons, becoming one of the Orthodoxy's 6 prefects. The two archbishops that priest Xian spoke of were respectively in charge of the Hall of Subjugation and the Hall of Shadow Steps. Several years ago, these two archbishops used the reason that the demons were flourishing and that the orthodoxy needed to increase the combat ability of human cultivators as a reason. They proposed a proposal in the 6 Ivies, with the exception of Star Caesar Academy. Teachers and students of the other academies could challenge each other as long as they were of the same level. If there was no sufficient reason or special permission from the Lee Palace, the challenge party could not refuse. Of course, there were also many rules and restrictions. No matter how one looked at it, this proposal was reasonable and necessary. As a result, when it was proposed, it received the support of all the halls and academies. The imperial court also praised it, and Star Caesar Academy even requested to participate in this plan. The problem was that when these two archbishops proposed this proposal, they were the Pope's most loyal assistants, and now the entire continent knew that they firmly stood on the side of the Divine Empress. Yes, these two archbishops were precisely the two archbishops that Melisha had spoken of a few days ago as turning the corner. When the eyes of the entire capital, especially the attention of the priests of the Lee Palace, were attracted by this farce in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate, these two archbishops once again pushed for this matter. Just what do they want? Priest Exen suddenly understood and couldn't help but feel a slight chill in his heart. He said, "His Holiness the Pope will not agree." The problem is there a reason to not agree? Melisha's voice was somewhat tired. The Orthodox Academy currently only has Chun Chong Sheng and Xin Yuan Pa. Even if Tang Tang comes out of the Mausoleum of Books, there are still too few people. According to the proposal's rules, it's too disadvantageous for the Orthodox Academy. 2 years ago, when this proposal was made, there wasn't a single person in the Orthodox Academy, so you can't accuse them of intentionally targeting the Orthodox Academy. Melisha finally said, "Right now, the Orthodox Academy only has 3.5 students. That is also the Orthodox Academy's own problem." At night, Priest Xin went to the Orthodox Academy and explained the situation to Chun Chong Sheng. That person is called Zhou Ziheng. He comes from the Temple Seminary and is a priest of the Hall of Subjugation. He has the status of a teacher of the Temple Seminary, and he's also a guest official of the Tianhai clan. Crossing the wilderness without a person on a boat. Zhou, the meticulous Zhou. What's hung? It's that hung. Chun Chong Sheng thought of the tall and thin man by the wheelchair, thought of the faint mocking expression on his face, and thought to himself, he truly is a very arrogant person. Zhou Ziheng has 3 identities. No matter which one, it will give him sufficient reason to act. If you act against Tianhai, Priest Xan sincerely said, "Since you've already endured for 3 days, there's no harm in enduring for a few more days. If the proposal from the Hall of Subjugation really does pass, then we'll see how to deal with it." Because Zhou Ziheng is a priest of the Hall of Subjugation, it is inconvenient for the Lee Palace priest guarding the Orthodox Academy to do anything to him. Chun Chongsheng fell silent for a while, then raised his head and seriously asked, "Then if that proposal really does pass and Zhou Ziheng challenges me, the Lee Palace will not do anything?" Priest Xin replied, "Yes." Chun Chongsheng said, "But he's at the star condensation realm, 1 level higher than me. According to the rules, I can refuse." Priest Xin looked into his eyes and said, "He's challenging the Orthodox Academy, and you're the principal. Perhaps there's someone else in the Orthodox Academy that can accept it?" Chun Chongsheng looked at him and said, "The position of principal was given to me by His Holiness and the bishops. The Orthodox Academy has no other students. You know the reason best." Priest Xin was somewhat embarrassed and said, "In short, just endure for a few more days. His Holiness naturally won't let you suffer loss." Chun Chongsheng said nothing more. After escorting him out of the Orthodox Academy, he entered the library and continued to absorb starlight for purification, continued to cultivate his sword style, and continued to decipher the secret of the Black Monolith. The night passed without a word, and morning came once more. Tianhai, and that expert from the Hall of Subjugation called Zhou Ziheng also came together. Today, there was still a light breeze, a drizzle, and also obscenities and insults. Chen Changsheng could endure. In the end, those obscenities were not food that was heavy in oil and salt, nor was it a bed covered in dust. There was nothing that he could not endure. Yet in the evening, a rather bad piece of news came from the palace. The proposal of the two archbishops had finally passed. Whether he could endure or not was no longer important. A letter of challenge was delivered into the Orthodox Academy, signed by Zhou Ziheng. Seeing that signature, Chen Changsheng fell silent for a while. Then he continued to absorb starlight for purification and continued to observe the black monolith. Now, he could already clearly see the lines on the black monolith, confirming that it was the heavenly tome monolith that Wang Zhizi had left in the Lingyan Pavilion. Moreover, he could already clearly sense that on the other end of the black monolith was the qi of the Garden of Zhou. Compared to the heavenly tome monolith in the Garden of Zhou, the methods of the Tianhai clan and certain people within the orthodoxy were really nothing. It was just that when his spiritual sense arduously crossed that ocean of sword intent, he seemed to always be able to see a small boat floating in that vast ocean. That small boat incessantly swayed with the waves, as if it could be destroyed at any moment, yet it never did. It was rather vexing to see. He had originally believed that Tianhai, who was endlessly cursing outside the academy gate, was the same as that broken academy gate last year, a disgrace to the Tianhai clan. But now, he realized that although he still believed that his view was correct, he wouldn't be angry when faced with this sort of situation. On the morning of the second day, Priest Xian once again delivered two pieces of bad news. Zhou Tong refused to release Zhixiu, and Zhixiu was still imprisoned in that gloomy prison. It was unknown when he would be released. The entire continent knew that Zhou Tong was the Divine Empress' most loyal and most terrifying dog. Compared to him, Su Shiji was nothing. The unyielding attitude that Zhou Tong had displayed in this matter made many people feel that it was an extremely bad omen. A storm was coming, and the city was about to be destroyed. Could it be that the imperial court really wanted to shed all pretense of cordiality with the orthodoxy? Chen Changsheng asked. This is His Holiness's will. His Eminence has personally come to visit, yet Zhou Tong is still not willing to release him. Just what does he want to do? At this moment, Priest Xian delivered the second piece of bad news. His Eminence's health is somewhat poor. It might be 2 days before he can go see Zhou Tong. At last, there was some good news. Zhixiu could not come out, but a certain person was finally coming out. At 5 in the morning, Chen Changsheng woke up on time and walked out of the gate of the Tradition Academy with Xian Yuan Pe. At this time, Tianhai heir and Zhou Ziheng hadn't arrived yet. There was a very long distance between the Orthodox Academy and the Mausoleum of Books in the south of the city. When they crossed the small river and arrived at the front gate of the Mausoleum of Books, the morning light was already very bright. As he gazed at the verdant and lush green tomb in front of him, Chen Changsheng very naturally thought of the scene when he viewed the monoliths and comprehended the Tao. Then, for some reason, he thought of the mausoleum in the plains of the unsetting sun. Then, he thought of that night several months ago. Wang Pe and Mao Qiu, you were standing where he was standing right now, while he, Go Hanshi, and the others were holding the dying Sun Mei. Mao Qiu was no longer the principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy. After taking over as the Archbishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons, his authority was even greater, but he was much quieter. There had been no news of him in the capital for a long time. Thinking of Zhuang Huanyu's death and the recent silence of the Heavenly Tao Academy, he vaguely understood the reason behind it, and his heart couldn't help but feel somewhat heavy. A rumbling sound roused him from his stupor. Accompanied by the slight tremors of the ground, the heavy stone gate in front of the Mausoleum of Books slowly opened. Try to finish the next chapter before 8:30. Chapter 435. Gradually, people walked out of the Mausoleum of Books. Most of them were the top 3 students who participated in the spring imperial examination. Those people obviously knew Chen Changsheng. They were surprised when they saw him, and then they all bowed to him. That night, under the starlight, countless people broke through to the next level, and the mausoleum of books bloomed with fireworks. No matter how they felt about Chen Changsheng, they all had to thank him. Chen Changsheng bowed back, and then looked at the mausoleum of books again. After a long time, Tang 36 finally came out. His hair was disheveled, and his body stank. His expensive clothes were full of stains, and he was carrying a quilt and a fur coat whose original color could no longer be seen on his shoulders. He didn't look like the elegant young master who was doted on by thousands of girls. He looked like a beggar who had just stolen some useless belongings from a dilapidated mansion. But the biggest change was not these, but his eyes. His eyes were very bright. Before, his eyes were also very bright, but it was a clear brightness. Now, his eyes were bright. In addition to being clear, there was also a sharpness to them. Even his dirty hair couldn't hide it. "I almost didn't recognize you." Chen Changsheng looked at him and said, "More handsome." Tang 36 eyebrows raised slightly. He was indescribably frivolous. Chen Changsheng thought, "You are easier to recognize like this." He shook his head and said, "Dirty." As he said this, he very naturally and imperceptibly took a step back and stood further away from Tang 36. Tang 36 threw the quilt and fur coat on his shoulder to Xian Yuanpe and hugged him with a big smile. Xian Yuanpe looked at the stinky quilt and fur coat in his hand helplessly. There was no helplessness on Chen Changsheng's face because he used his hand to cover his face to avoid smelling or touching anything dirty. Tang 36 let go of him and asked proudly, "What changes do you see in me?" Chen Changsheng seriously looked at him from head to toe and asked, "The Wen Shui family cut off your money. Now you want to learn to be independent?" Tang 36 said, "What are you talking about?" Chen Changsheng pointed at the quilt in Xian Yuanpo's arms and said, "If it was the old Tang Tang, why would he take out the quilt that Mr. Sun used for decades? What do you know? This is a souvenir." Chen Changsheng thought to himself, "What is this commemoration for?" "To commemorate the time we spent viewing the monoliths and comprehending the Tao in the mausoleum of books." Tang 36 turned around to look at the green mausoleum and said ruefully, "How can people like you, who covet the treasures of the Garden of Zhou, who have not completed the time you spent viewing the monoliths, be worthy of saying such words?" Chen Changsheng did not know how to respond, so he said, "It seems like your days in the mausoleum of books were pretty good." Tang 36 said, "Not bad. A few days ago, I barely managed to enter the upper level of ethereal opening." When he said the words, "upper level of ethereal opening," his expression was deliberately calm, and his tone did not fluctuate, but both Chen Changsheng and Xian Yuanpe could hear his pride and arrogance. Chen Changsheng remembered that when he left the mausoleum of books, Tang 36 had just entered ethereal opening. Now, in just a few months, he had broken through 2 thresholds and reached the upper level of ethereal opening. He indeed had the right to be proud, but he thought that according to this guy's personality, he would definitely not play it down to the end. As expected, in the next moment, Tang 36 broke through. He turned around and looked at Chen Changsheng excitedly and said, "F***CK. You don't even know that right now. I can teach Guan Fei by how to behave." Breaking through in cultivation was an extremely difficult matter. To be able to break through 3 levels in such a short amount of time was even more unimaginable. Tang 36's excitement was understandable, but Chen Changsheng found it hard to be excited. Looking at Chen Changsheng's calm face, Tang 36 finally remembered that the reason why he and himself had such good fortune in the mausoleum of books could not be separated from the starlight that Chen Changsheng attracted that night. He couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed and said, "Of course, I have to thank you for this matter, but in the end, it's still because my talent is high enough." Chen Changsheng gave a relatively objective conclusion. "It's mainly because after you entered the Tradition Academy, you didn't slack off anymore." This was also what the wise elder from the Pavilion of Divine Ordinance had said in the proclamation of Azure Clouds. Tang 36 had nothing to say, so he could only say, "Are you not going to congratulate me?" "Congratulations," Chen Changsheng said without any sincerity. He then looked towards a mausoleum of books and asked in confusion, "Where go Han Shi and the others? Why haven't they come out yet? Liang Xiaoxiao and Qi Jian left the mausoleum of books ahead of time and entered the garden of Zhou. Among the mountainly disciples, Gohan Shi, Liang Banhu, and Guan Fei Bai were the same as Tang 36. They stayed in the mausoleum of books to continue viewing the monoliths. Although the orthodoxy did not require the monolith viewers to leave the mausoleum of books, Chen Changsheng thought that since so many people had finished viewing the monoliths, they should also come out. But after looking for a long time, he did not see the figures of those three people. Tang 36 said, "Originally, we agreed to leave the mausoleum of books together, but I don't know what urgent matter happened to Mountain Li, so they left last night ahead of time." Chen Changsheng thought to himself, so it was like this. Seeing his expression, Tang 36 asked in surprise, "You know what happened in Mountain Li?" Chen Changsheng grunted. Of course he knew that something big happened in Mountain Li. If it wasn't something really big, no one would disturb the monolith viewers in the mausoleum of books. Tang 36 was a little surprised and asked, "What happened?" Chen Changsheng signaled Xian Yuan put to throw the stinky bedding and fur on the carriage and said to Tang 36, "Let's go back and talk." Tang 36 suddenly remembered something. He put his hand into the bedding and took out a letter and a notebook. He gave it to Chen Changsheng and said, "Gohan Shi told me to give this to you." Chen Changsheng recognized that it was the notebook left behind by Sun Mei. It helped him avoid many detours in the process of viewing the monoliths and also helped the youths who lived under the same roof. The letter was left behind by Gohan Shi. The content was very normal. It said that he left the capital early and could not meet again. He used the pen to greet him. The future was long, and they would definitely meet again. Tang 36 looked at the letter and said mockingly, "It seems that the friends of Mountain Li are still not convinced." Chen Changsheng said, "Why can't you think of people in a positive light? Gohan Shi did not mean what you said." Tang 36 suddenly said, "I heard you are now the principal of the Tradition Academy." Chen Changsheng hesitated for a while and said, "It seems yes." The rumor was confirmed. Tang 36 was silent for a while. Then he looked at Chen Changsheng and said sincerely, "Your status is already different. You can't be as naive and childish as before." As he spoke, he reached out and patted Chen Changsheng's shoulder. Chen Changsheng looked at the dirty hand on his shoulder. His lips couldn't help but twitch, but he did not argue with him. It was said that in the vast ocean and the mountains of sorcery, a grain of rice and a pearl. Su Li had lost to him on this matter, so winning against this fellow was nothing to boast about. Returning to Hundred Flowers Lane, the carriage stopped. Tang 36 looked at the Li Palace clergyman who bowed to Chen Changsheng and felt a little uncomfortable. He jumped off the carriage and entered the small store at the entrance of the lane. Xian Yuan sat in the carriage and brought his ragged belongings back to the Tradition Academy. Chen Changsheng followed Tang 36 and saw him buy 2 fried dough sticks and a bowl of soy milk. He ate them all the way to the lane. It was clearly the simplest and most common food, but Tang 36 ate it happily. He shook his head and was very happy. Is it really that good? Chen Changsheng was truly very curious. Tang 36 said, "You don't know, in the mausoleum of books, other things are fine, but the food is too terrible, especially after you and Qi Jian left. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Does that idiot Guan Fei Bai know how to cook? I'm actually beginning to miss the food Xian Yuan made. I even feel that the food in the Tradition Academy is even better than the banquet in Clear Lake Restaurant. How miserable do you think it is?" Chen Changsheng thought it truly was miserable, and then he thought of the cold and ruthless Guan Fei by cutting bacon and stir-frying green peppers in that small courtyard. He couldn't help but shake his head, finding it hard to imagine. Tang 36 pressed half of the dough stick in his hand into the slightly yellow soy milk and asked, "Do you want a bite?" Chen Changsheng looked at his finger that had stuck into the soy milk and thought of the dirt he had seen under his fingernails. He hurriedly waved his hand and said no. Tang 36 was very disdainful. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Do you understand life? Chen Changsheng helplessly said, "Although I know you've been stifled for a few years playing the role of a noble young master, and now you're showing your true temperament. But can't you use less profanity? It's rather grating on the ears. Tang 36 readily accepted the advice. He raised a bowl of soy milk as a sacrifice to the heavens, and said to the sun that was gradually being covered by the clouds, "Sun," as they joked and cursed, the two entered Hundred Flowers Lane. They saw Zhou Ziheng standing there, holding a paper umbrella. Suddenly, the sun in the sky was completely obscured by the dark clouds. Rain began to drift down, falling on that paper umbrella that seemed like it could not withstand the wind. This scene was very wonderful, and there was a vague mystery that was difficult to describe with words. Zhou Ziheng seemed to have anticipated the descent of the rain. This represented some sort of realm, indicating that he had already begun to peer into the Tao of the heavens and earth. But seeing this scene, Chun Chongsheng first thought, why didn't you hold an umbrella when it was raining 2 days ago? Then, he remembered the letter of challenge. This person represented the temple seminary to challenge the tradition academy. Tang 36 was even more unfazed by this scene. He didn't know who this thin and tall man was. He was a little angry because the sun suddenly disappeared, but he thought of Chun Chongsheng's words, so he didn't say anything. He only said, "Please make way." After saying this, he walked forward. Zhou Ziheng didn't make way. He didn't even look at him. In his eyes, there was no stinky, ragged young man. He looked at Chun Chongsheng and said, "Have you thought about it?" Chun Chongsheng said, "I've thought about it. I'll give you a reply." Zhou Ziheng smiled and said, "Are you going to keep thinking about it?" This smile was very hateful, with a hint of sarcasm and mockery. Tang 36 was stunned. He couldn't imagine that in the current Zhou dynasty, there was still someone who dared to speak to him and Chun Chongsheng with this kind of attitude in front of the Tradition Academy. "Who is this person?" he asked Chun Chongsheng. Chun Chongsheng replied, "Zhou Ziheng." Tang 36 had never heard of this name before. He asked, "Zhou Ziheng, who is that?" Zhou Ziheng was slightly angered. He felt that Chun Chongsheng and this beggar-like fellow were intentionally using this conversation to humiliate him. Tang 36 turned around and asked Zhou Ziheng, "I say, just who are you?" Zhou Ziheng expressionlessly replied, "Zhou Ziheng of the Hall of Subjugation." Tang 36 looked at him and asked, "You're very famous?" Zhou Ziheng didn't know how to answer this question. Inexplicable. Tang 36 looked at him like he was looking at an idiot, then turned around and said to Chun Chongsheng, "You have to understand your current identity and status. There's no need to pay attention to a person you've never even heard of. Can he even reach?" Saying this, he carried the soy milk and youtiao and walked past Zhou Ziheng, walking into the alley. Zhou Ziheng lowered his head and took a deep breath. Tang 36 stopped. The rain suddenly became disorderly and then began to fall back down like willow leaves. Zhou Ziheng appeared in front of Tang 36, blocking his path. All was quiet in Hundred Flowers Lane. Tang 36 looked at him and very calmly said 4 words. "Idiot, get out of the way." At this moment, Tang 36 was covered in filth, reeking, and his clothes were in tatters. He really did look like a beggar, but his aura was that of a prince, because he had never been a beggar, but the richest prince in the world. He was richer than the princess of Ping, Luoluo, and Nank, these true princesses added together. So when he said these 4 words, his arrogance had reached an unimaginable level. Was it unimaginable to be so domineering? Yes, because this was not arrogance, but confidence. Without 1,000 years of accumulation, it was impossible to nurture such confidence. Zhou Ziheng squinted at Tang 36, his killing intent rising. Yet in the end, he did not attack, because Chun Chongsheng was looking at him. Many of the Li Palace priests were also looking at him. What made him most wary and puzzled was that the imperial guard that should have stood on his side had suddenly given rise to an undisguised and berserk killing intent. He was very clear that if he really attacked, then in the next moment, that killing intent would tear him into pieces. He didn't understand why, and his hands began to tremble. Tang 36 walked past him again, with a bowl of soy milk in his left hand and a fried dough stick in his right hand. He still didn't look at him. The curtain of rain slowly fell and fell on the paper umbrella silently. From the depth of Hundred Flowers Lane came Tian Hai Ye Air's cursing. Listening to those filthy words, Tang 36's face became a bit ugly. Walking to the gate of the Tradition Academy, he saw Tian Haya sitting on the wheelchair and cursing at the gate. Chen Chang Shangyu, if you can, then come and hit me. Tang 36 walked behind Tian Haya and it didn't stop him. He listened carefully. Many priests, imperial guard, and citizens of the capital who heard the news all saw this scene. The rain was like smoke in the 100 Flowers Lane. Qin Chongxing asked, "What are you doing?" Tang 36 said, "Recalling my life." Tian Haya heard the sound, turned around, and his expression changed slightly. Qin Chongxing didn't understand. What life? I'm seriously recalling my life. Tang 36 sighed. Motherf asterisk her. I've never heard such a cheap request. I said I like him. He's my good friend. Chapter 436. Although Tang 36's body was evil and his clothes were ragged, which was very different from how he was rumored to be, his sarcastic words and the nonchalance in his eyes still made Tian Haya recognize his identity very quickly. Tian Haya's face instantly became very ugly. The reason why he went to Heavenly Academy to attend the Ivy Festival was because Tang 36 once said to the entire capital that he would disable him. The final result of this incident was that because of the restriction of the teachers of the Heavenly Academy, Tang 36 couldn't participate in the Ivy Festival. Tian Haya used an excuse to get mad and destroyed one of Xian Yuan Po's arms. Then he was beaten into a cripple by Luo. The two never met each other officially until today, but this didn't stop Tian Haya from blaming Tang 36 for his disability. He stared at Tang 36. His face was pale, and his eyes were full of hatred. He wanted to eat Tang 36, but he didn't do anything. Instead, after hearing Tang 36's last sentence, he thought of Tang 36's personality in the legends. He had a bad feeling in his heart and said with a sharp voice, I said it to Chen Chongsheng. It has nothing to do with you. If you dare, then come and hit me. Tian Haya was shameless and vicious. He dared to say this to everyone, including Chen Chongsheng, but he didn't dare to say it to Tang 36, because he knew that Tang 36 could really put down his pride and attack him. Tang 36 was a little surprised. He didn't expect this guy to react so fast. He couldn't think of any good solution, so he said unreasonably, I don't care. I want to fight with you. After saying this, he said to Chen Chongsheng, help me roll up my sleeves. His left hand was holding a bowl of soy milk, and his right hand was holding a half-fried dough stick. He indeed couldn't roll up his sleeves by himself. Rolling up sleeves was a symbolic action that everyone understood. It was a signal of departure. Tian Haya's face was a little pale. I won't fight with you. I am disabled anyway. If you don't care about losing face, you can do it yourself. Qin Chongsheng was thinking whether he should really roll up Tang 36's sleeves or not. Suddenly, he heard the words, don't care about losing face, and thought that this was great. He didn't need to think anymore. As expected, when Tang 36 heard that he wasn't afraid of losing face, he didn't hesitate at all. His eyes lit up, and he said, what is face? Tian Haya looked at him and said uneasily, what do you want to do? Do you really want to bully a disabled person like me in front of so many people? The misty rain enveloped 100 Flowers Lane. The rain was not heavy, and it was even gradually lessening. The Li Palace priests and the Imperial Guard responsible for maintaining order were already surrounded by many citizens of the capital. Tian Haya's reputation in the capital was extremely bad, but he was still a youth, not even 14 years old, and he had already been disabled for almost a year. His legs were as thin as hemp sticks, and he looked very pitiful. If someone made a move on him while he was in the wheelchair, it would probably attract a lot of criticism. But Tang 36 was not afraid of any censure or criticism. He looked at Tian Haya, smiled, and said, do you know that there was one thing I liked to do the most when I was young? Tian Haya stared into his eyes, his voice trembling. What is it? Tang 36 said, I like to use a stick to chase after a dog that has fallen into the river and beat it nonstop. Tian Haya understood what he meant, shivered, and shouted with a trembling voice, someone come quickly. The only grandson of the one Shui Tang family is hitting someone. He wants to hit a disabled person like me. Tang 36 was not in a hurry and let him shout. When Tian Haiyu's voice finally stopped, he said to the crowd outside the lane, "Everyone see clearly, I didn't do anything." He really didn't hit Tian Haiyu. He didn't even touch Tian Haiyu's clothes. As he spoke, he purposely raised the soy milk and Yoqiao in his hands, indicating to the crowd that even if he wanted to hit someone, he couldn't do it. Then his expression suddenly became cold, and one foot fiercely kicked Tian Haiyu's abdomen. A muffled sound. Tian Haiyu, together with his wheelchair, was kicked into the rain on the ground, and his head was bleeding. Tang 36's kick was too hard. The disabled youth curled up like a shrimp. His face was extremely pale, and he was in so much pain that he couldn't even speak. In front of the gate of the Orthodox Academy, outside 100 Flowers Lane, there was a deathly stillness. No one could speak. No one could have imagined that one moment he was still smiling, raising the soy milk and Yoqiao, and in the next moment he really would hit the disabled youth in the wheelchair. The guard of the Tian Hai clan and Zhou Ziheng didn't expect this, so they had no time to stop him. A gust of wind howled, and the guards of the Tian Hai clan rushed to the scene, protecting Tian Haiyu. The paper umbrella in Zhou Ziheng's hand had been thrown away long ago, and his right hand was already gripping the hilt of his sword. With a face full of anger, he stared at Tang 36, as if he would attack in the next moment. Tang 36 still didn't pay any attention to this star condensation expert. Looking at the crowd around him, he raised the soy milk and Yoqiao in his hands a little higher and said, "Everyone see clearly, I really didn't attack, and I definitely didn't attack. I kicked." It really was like this. He didn't hit Tian Haiyu with a dirty hand. He hit him with a dirty foot. Zhou Ziheng roared, and the edge of his sword came out of its sheath. The sword intent suddenly rose, echoing in front of the Orthodox Academy. The target of this powerful sword intent was naturally Tang 36. In the mausoleum of books, viewing the monoliths, comprehending the Tao, and diligently cultivating, Tang 36's cultivation had advanced extremely quickly. At such an age, he had inconceivably cultivated to the upper level of ethereal opening, but he was no match for a star condensation expert. However, he still didn't even glance at Zhou Ziheng, continuing to walk towards the gate of the Orthodox Academy. Upon walking in 100 Flowers Lane and seeing Zhou Ziheng for the first time, he knew that this person very much wanted to be seen by the world. So from start to finish, he did not look. This was naturally a humiliation. Zhou Ziheng was a priest of the Hall of Subjugation, a guest official of the Tian Hai clan, and a teacher of the Temple Seminary. No matter which identity it was, he was bound to have the right to be arrogant. How could an arrogant person endure this sort of humiliation? So even though he already knew Tang 36's identity, he still wanted to attack. The sword was not able to attack. Only the concentrated sound of bowstrings being drawn could be heard. Several dozen Imperial guards arranged themselves behind Tang 36, the divine crossbows in their hands raised horizontally. The sharp and rippling chi of the crossbow bolts was terrifying. A deputy general stood in the back, his face covered in frost, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword. He stared into Zhou Ziheng's eyes, his warning extremely clear. As long as he moved, he would die. Tang 36 and Chun Chong Sheng entered the Tradition Academy. The gate of the academy closed with a bang. It was like the crisp sound of a slap to the face. Tian Haiyu was supported by his guards and attendants, his face pale and in unbearable pain. Zhou Ziheng stood in the drizzle, his face pale. He looked at the deputy general and coldly said, "I want to know, does Divine General Xue know of this matter?" Everyone knew that the Imperial Guard responsible for the safety of the entire capital was under the command of the continent's second-ranked Divine General, Xue Xingchuan, and Divine General Xue had always been loyal to the Divine Empress. Today, the attitude the Imperial Guard had displayed in front of the Orthodox Academy was clearly hostile to the Tian Hai clan. The deputy general looked at Zhou Ziheng as if he was looking at an idiot and said, "My grandfather's family only has one son. If I don't stop you, do you want your entire family to be killed?" After saying this, he waved his hand to signal his subordinates to disperse, Then he walked to the inn opposite the Orthodox Academy and continued to drink tea and stare blankly. In the Orthodox Academy, Xin Yuan Pe and Chun Chongqing very enthusiastically carried Tang 36 into the library. Your enthusiasm makes me feel very uncomfortable. Tang 36 looked at the expression on their faces and felt a little strange. Chen Chongqing looked at him with a face full of relief. Xin Yuan also looked like he was relieved from a heavy burden. You don't know, these days, that little crippled monster has been cursing outside the gate every day. We really can't hold it anymore, so we were hoping for you to come back. Chen Chongqing looked at him and said gratefully, just as expected, as soon as you came back, you settled all these things. Otherwise, we really don't know what to do. Tang 36 was a little proud, but also a little angry. He said, you let people block the gate and curse? Good for nothing. Chen Chongqing was a little embarrassed and said, I really don't have the experience to deal with these things. Xin Yuanpe said on the side, Tian Haya Air is cursing us because he's crippled. He doesn't even care about his face. What can we do? Do we really have to beat him up? Tang 36 thought to himself. Didn't he just kick him once, and it was very enjoyable? Why can't he? Chen Chongqing said helplessly, that guy's like a pile of shit right now. No matter how we deal with him, we can't avoid dirtying our hands. So we have to wait for you to come back. Tang 36 said, why do we have to wait for me to come back? Chen Chongqing turned around and looked at the scenery outside the window. Xin Yuanpe was more honest and said, you have more experience in this area. Plus, we all know that you are even more shameless than him. Tang 36 heard this and was a little surprised. Then he became angry. What do you mean? You two better explain to me, what do you mean? Is it that in your eyes, I'm also a pile of shit? Xin Yuanpe was speechless for a moment. He didn't know how to explain. He wanted to say a few words, but he realized that he didn't know what to say. Chen Chongqing comforted him. What we mean is that your ability to be annoying and not afraid of dirt is perfect for dealing with this kind of person. Tang 36 reconstructed this sentence in his heart and became even angrier. Isn't this just a stick to hold shit up? How is it better? Of course, they weren't really angry. They were just joking. Chen Chongqing and Xin Yuanpe were indeed waiting for Tang 36 to come back. Because they were both not good at talking, they were also not good at thinking and planning. Luo obviously had this ability, but her identity was too sensitive. Therefore, if they wanted to solve the Tradition Academy's current problems, they could only rely on Tang 36. In fact, not many people noticed that many of the Tradition Academy's previous problems were solved by Tang 36. After hearing Chen Chongqing talk about the new rules of the tradition, Tang 36 thought for a while and then put the youqiao in his hand into the soybean milk and said, drown them. Chen Chongqing and Xin Yuanpe didn't understand. What did drowning mean? The next chapter will be at night. Chapter 437. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. Tang 36 didn't explain too much to them and said directly, if I can't take care of this, then my name isn't Tang 36. This sentence was said with great confidence, but Chen Chongqing and Xin Yuanpe were more concerned about the other three problems. First, there was a lot of rainwater in this bowl of soybean milk. How diluted was it? Second, the youqiao was held in his hand for so long. How dirty was it? Third, it was common for Tang 36 to change his name. Why did this promise sound a bit unreliable? His name wasn't Tang 36. His name was Tang Tang. Now that he entered the upper stage of ethereal opening, he had to leave the proclamation of azure clouds and enter the proclamation of golden distinction. But he didn't know what his rank would be. It couldn't be that he was still coincidentally ranked 36. Last time when the proclamation of azure clouds changed, he used the excuse that his rank wasn't good to change his name, so he couldn't use the same excuse this time. Xin Yuanpe felt that Tang 36 words were too insincere. So he shook his head and walked out. Chen Chongqing wanted to ask for clarification, but then he thought that he really didn't understand these things, so why bother himself? He asked, what name do you think you'll change this time? I think I'll at least enter the top 30. That's the proclamation of golden distinction, not the proclamation of azure clouds. So what? I'm at the upper stage of ethereal opening. As long as I'm not lazy, I can catch up to you in minutes. Tang 36 said proudly. There's a lot of dust on his face, but it could still be seen that his skin was whiter and he was much thinner. It was obvious that his cultivation in the mausoleum of books was very difficult. To be able to enter the proclamation of golden distinction at this age and have the confidence to enter the top 30, this was extremely rare in the past. He indeed had the right to be proud. Qin Changsheng was truly happy for him and said, "Keep working hard." Tang 36 didn't feel good after hearing this and said, "You really think of yourself as the principal?" Qin Changsheng laughed and was about to apologize, but Tang 36 suddenly sighed. "What's wrong? Well, I think about how you and Su Yu Rong ran so fast in front of me, and how I can only shock my relatives in Wenchuan with my amazing achievement. It's really boring." After saying this, Tang 36 stood up and looked around the library. He suddenly asked, "It's fine if Princess Luo didn't come to greet me, but where is Zhixiu?" In his heart, the wolf youth Zhixiu was a high-quality student that he had bought for the Orthodox Academy with a large sum of money. Now that the Orthodox Academy was facing a problem that needed his help, he couldn't let him leave. Qin Changsheng said, "There's something I haven't told you yet." Tang 36 turned to him and asked, "What is it?" Qin Changsheng replied, "Zhixiu is currently in Zhou prison." From a moment Qin Changsheng and Zhixiu left the mausoleum of books and entered the garden of Zhou until today, this story seemed rather long, but it did not take too long to finish. Even the youqiao and the soybean milk had not soaked. So many things have happened. Tang 36 said, "Let's not worry about other things first, but Zhixiu, we spent money on him, so we must get him out as soon as possible." The Orthodox Academy had spent money on Zhixiu, so he was a person of the Orthodox Academy. He was a person of the Orthodox Academy, so the Orthodox Academy had to protect him. This was a very simple principle. Moreover, Zhou prison was an extremely frightening place. Spending one more day, and there was like spending 1 year in the abyss of hell. Qin Changsheng was also very worried about Zhixiu, but the Orthodoxy and the imperial court were in a standoff, and there was also a problem within the Li Palace. Bishop Mei Lish's health was not good, so he didn't know what to do. From a certain perspective, Zhou Tong is like that Tian Haiyuer that all of you can't do anything about, but he's countless times more frightening and powerful than Tian Haiyuer. In order to achieve his goals, he can do even the most savage and disgusting of things. Everyone knows that he's the Divine Empress's mad dog. Whoever the Empress wants him to bite, he'll bite. Against such a person, all schemes are useless. But why does he have to bite onto the Orthodox Academy? Because His Holiness, the Pope, has already expressed that the throne of the great Zhou should be returned to the imperial clan. But the Empress clearly doesn't think this way. Qin Changsheng lowered his head and said, "In truth, I don't really understand what's so important about the throne." Tang 36 looked at him like he was looking at a monster and said, "That's the throne of the great Zhou. That's supreme authority. That's a temptation that no one can resist." Qin Changsheng raised his head and looked at him. "But I really don't feel that there's anything good about this. I just feel that spending time and energy on these things is really very unreasonable." Tang 36 looked into his eyes. They were so clear and clean, without the slightest falsehood. He couldn't help but be slightly moved. "You really think this way?" "Yes," Qin Changsheng replied. "Qin Changsheng, you really are a monster, and a true monster, not a freak like Tian Haiyuer." Tang 36 looked at him and said, "You can't understand us people, and I also find it very difficult to understand you, why you really don't care about these things." Qin Changsheng thought it over, then said, "Maybe it's because I've seen something even more important, such as life and death. Outside of life and death, everything else was other people's business. Life and death were also important. There were no great things in life, only life and death." These were all words from the ancient records. Qin Changsheng was well-versed in the Taoist canon and remembered many things, but he didn't need them. He only needed to remember the two words life and death. For ordinary people, life and death were after their 100 years. For cultivators, life and death were after their 100 years. For Qin Changsheng, life and death were always in front of him, in a single thought, so he could never forget it. Before life and death, how could he still be interested in those appendages of life? At least, before he solved his own problem, he wouldn't be too interested. Tang 36 didn't know Chen Changxing's problem, but after hearing the two words life and death, for some reason, he suddenly felt that the rain outside the window brought a chill that didn't belong to summer. Chen Changxing, then, thought of other things. He thought of the sick bishop, the internal conflicts of the orthodoxy, and the words that Su Li once said to him. He said, "Is this world really so unbearable?" Tang 36 said, "At least it's not as clean as we hope. No one can understand why you can become the principal of the Orthodox Academy." Even though he had rendered great service for the orthodoxy and the great Zhou in the Mausoleum of Books and the Garden of Zhou, with Chen Changxing's age of 16, there was no reason for him to become the principal of the Orthodox Academy. In the view of Tang 36 and many people who didn't know the inside story, there was definitely something fishy about this matter. There were many transactions or inside stories that couldn't see the light of day. Chen Changxing didn't believe that those things couldn't see the light of day. At the very least, he could tell Tang 36, "My teacher is His Holiness's senior brother." His gaze passed through the window and fell upon the verdant campus of the Orthodox Academy. He said, "He was the previous principal of the Orthodox Academy." Tang 36 was very shocked, even more shocked than when he had heard Chen Changxing talk about Su Li and that part in Xuanyang City. The bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy 10-some years ago had directly or indirectly changed the entire human world. Even the distant longevity sect and Mount Li in the south had been greatly affected. The previous principal of the Orthodox Academy was an important figure that no one could forget, even though his name had long since been struck off from the records of the Orthodoxy and was strictly forbidden to mention in the capital. No wonder you're just a young Taoist from the countryside, but you can read the Taoist canon. No wonder His Holiness made you the principal of the Orthodox Academy and raised you to be his successor. No wonder Zhou Tong would plot against the Orthodox Academy. Tang 36 looked at him and murmured, "So you're actually that important figure's only successor?" Chen Changxing said, "No, I still have a senior." When he left Xining village, his teacher had told him a few things, so he rarely mentioned his senior in the capital. Up until now, he had only admitted it in front of Su Yurong and Tang 36. Tang 36 asked, "You still have a senior? What kind of person is he?" Chen Changxing thought about it and realized that Senior Yurong was really hard to describe with words. Perhaps it was because Senior never spoke? Senior is a very extraordinary person. How extraordinary? Could he be even more extraordinary than me? Senior is 10,000 times more extraordinary than you were in the past. Now that you've started to work hard, Senior will also be 100 times more extraordinary than you. Chen Changxing looked at him and said. He didn't intentionally mock or look down on him, but rather came to a conclusion after serious consideration. Tang 36 was silent for a very long time, then said, "It seems that he really is an extraordinary person." Chen Changxing said, "Yes, he's my idol." Tang 36 suddenly asked, "What does your teacher want to do?" Chen Changxing was silent for a while, then said, "I don't understand what you mean." Tang 36 stared into his eyes and said, "You should understand very well what I mean. Since Taoist Ji was not only Taoist Ji, but also the previous principal of the Orthodox Academy and the leader of the opposition against the Tianhai Divine Empress, then everything he did was worthy of careful consideration. You should have been well aware that Chen Changxing's background could not possibly remain a secret. Through the attitudes of Mei Li Sha and the Pope, it could even be confirmed that before Chen Changxing arrived in the capital, he had already contacted the Li Palace. Then he should have been even more aware that sooner or later, the Tianhai Divine Empress would eventually learn of Chen Changxing's background. This also meant that Chen Changxing's situation would become extremely difficult, perhaps even incomparably dangerous. Yet he still insisted that Chen Changxing enter the capital to take the imperial examination and did not give any explanation. Why? Was it because of that engagement with Su Yurong? This was a very important question. It was just that Chen Changxing had never thought about it, Or perhaps he had intentionally not allowed himself to think about this question. Until Tang 36 pierced through this window paper. Reporting to Your Excellency, the latest news has come from Hanzhan County. A Dr. Daoist Ji truly did come, but by the time the mounted scouts arrived, that person had already disappeared. Not even the Empress was able to kill a person like Principal Shang. So how could people like us possibly find him? Zhou Tong sat behind his desk, examining the 10-odd records of the case that had been delivered last night from the front courtyard, not even raising his head. The subordinate stood in front of the desk and whispered, "According to what was said in Xining Village, we have verified that Daoist Ji, that traitor Shang, truly does have another disciple." Zhou Tong's finger paused in the middle of flipping through the pages. Then he raised his head. "My state after returning home really is much better." Chapter 438. Zhou Tong put down the file and turned to his subordinate. "Is it confirmed?" The subordinate took out a portrait from his bosom and said, "It's absolutely true." Zhou Tong did not take it. He only glanced at it, saying nothing. The subordinate continued, "According to the records in the file, in the year that Chun Changsheng came to the capital, he never mentioned this person." Zhou Tong gazed at the light outside the window in silence for a very long time. Suddenly, he said, "Tell me, is Crown Prince Xiaoming dead, or was he secretly taken away by those fellows of the imperial clan with evil intentions?" The subordinate didn't know how to answer and was very nervous. In a slightly hoarse voice, he asked, "Sir's meaning is?" Zhou Tong shook his head. "I don't mean anything. I just subconsciously thought of this matter." The subordinate did not dare to respond. There are some matters that can't be investigated clearly for now, but there's no need to care about them. Zhou Tong drew back his gaze from the window and said, "Why was Liang Xiao willing to make a deal with a devil like Black Robe, willing to commit suicide just to deal with Su Li and his daughter? Because he wanted revenge. Why did Su Li go to the longevity sect and kill so many people, and then run to Xuanyang City to start a massacre, thereby greatly damaging the Liang clan's strength? Because the Southerners wanted to take advantage of the great Zhou's internal strife to invade the North and capture his wife to threaten him, making him go crazy. Why is the great Zhou in internal strife? Because of that bloody incident in the Orthodox Academy. It's said that all things have a source. In the end, everything is the problem of the great Zhou's imperial throne. As long as we can clearly understand this point, our direction will not be wrong." The subordinate said, "In 5 days, Prince Chen Lu went to the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education 3 times. Don't forget, although the Empress has no sons of her own, Emperor Xian still had many sons and grandsons. Even if the Empress really did abdicate in the future and return the imperial throne to the Chun imperial clan, Prince Chen Lu is so young. Just what chance does he have? It's only natural for him to be anxious." My lord's meaning is that Prince Chen Lu wants to fight for the orthodoxy support. Archbishop Mei Lisha is about to return to the Sea of Stars. If he doesn't show his face at this time and fight for the favor of the priests of the Li Palace, how can he live in the capital until now, and even live better and better? Although you don't care about the throne, everyone else cares about it except for you. That's why I believe that in the end, or in other words, the root of all problems is the throne. Dean Shang's thoughts will ultimately fall on that throne. After hearing Tang 36 words, before Chun Chang, Shang started thinking. The first thing he noticed was the title. "Who is Principal Shang?" "Your teacher, Shang Xingzhou." Chen Changsheng was silent for a long time. This was the first time he had heard this name, and he had lived with the owner of this name for 15 years. In this recent period of time, he originally had many opportunities to learn this name, but he did not ask whether it was Bishop Mei Lisha or the Pope because he did not want to know this name. He did not want to face some problems that he did not want to face because of this name. At the same time, he also did not want others to know that he did not know this name, because this made him somewhat sad. Tang 36 vaguely guessed his current mood. He didn't know why he disliked his teacher and asked, "Have you ever thought about why he took you as his disciple?" Chen Changsheng was a bit confused and asked, "Master picked me up by the stream. What other reason could there be?" Tang 36 stared into his eyes and said, Your surname is Chun. And? Chen Changsheng still did not understand. Tang 36 said, Have you never thought that you might be from the imperial family? Chen Changsheng was startled and shook his head. No, I floated down from the mountain stream inside the cloud grave. My birth parents might be the descendants of the sinners. Tang 36 said mockingly. How old were you back then? You don't know shit. Chen Changsheng said, This is what Senior said. Senior has never lied to others, and he definitely would not lie to me. He said this sentence with certainty. There was no hesitation in his clean eyes. Tang 36 still wanted to say something, but looking into his eyes, he couldn't bear it and changed the topic. How do you plan to go next? From Xining to the capital. Chen Changsheng originally thought that his path was very clear. It was to find the secret to defy the heavens and change his fate, and thus escape from the shadow of death. But now he suddenly realized that before this, he already had to face many forks in the road. I don't know. You need someone to help you. Who can help me? Me. Okay, then you help me. It was a very simple conversation, but it was very warm and trusting, because they were both youngsters. They were either calm and mature or arrogant and frivolous, but they were both youngsters. Youths were sometimes so hot-blooded and naive that it was annoying. However, compared to those elders who had been through hardships for a long time, their lives were much simpler, and their interactions with each other were much simpler. Tang 36 said no problem. First, let's understand the cause of this incident. Chen Changsheng shook his head and said, Help me do something first. Tang 36 didn't think and said without hesitation, Say it. What is it? Chen Changsheng said to him, Can you go take a shower and brush your teeth first? What was the saying again? I haven't even brushed my teeth yet. Anyways, Tang 36 was annoyed and kicked out of the library by Chen Changsheng. He used 2 big buckets of hot water and washed himself from head to toe. After making sure that there was no dirt from the mausoleum of books, he changed into a clean set of clothes and took the steam bun that Xian Yuan had just made and went to the lake. Chen Changsheng placed Mr. Sun Mei's notes on the bookshelf and registered them. Then, he went to wash Mr. Sun Mei's bedding and Tang 36 fur. It took him an hour to wash them clean. Then, he hung them under the great banyan tree. They looked like 2 swings. The rain in the morning had already stopped. The sunlight of early summer shone on the surface of the lake, but it didn't evaporate too much water. It didn't feel stuffy. Tian Haya Air's cursing could no longer be heard. The Tradition Academy was quiet and beautiful. Standing by the lake and looking at the scenery on the other side, Tang 36 said, My grandpa said that the Pope is a good person, so you don't have to worry too much. As he spoke, he was very focused on tearing the steamed bun in his hands into pieces. The Pope was Chen Changsheng's martial uncle. Logically speaking, he should have been very happy to accept this statement. But from following Su Li to the south in the snowy plains of the Demon Realm, he had seen too many assassinations and plots. It was very difficult for him to convince himself that the Pope was really a good person. Zhu Luo and Guan Xinca should have been invited by the Pope. Chen Changsheng looked at the blue sky and white clouds reflected in the lake. He wanted to touch the unreal sky of the green leaf world and shook his head. How could a good person become the Pope? This view of the world seems mature, but it's actually very vulgar. Tang 36 threw the pieces of the steamed bun into the lake and said, His Holiness the Pope has never been famed for his wisdom. He was able to become the leader of the Orthodoxy because he truly had a very close relationship with the Divine Empress. Of course, the most important reason is still because his venerable self-strength is truly unfathomable. Even your teacher, Principal Shang, ultimately lost to him. Chen Changsheng said, But he wanted to kill Su Li. We've circled back again. Tang 36 looked at him and jeered, I'll say something you don't like to hear, but Su Li has killed so many people in his life, and countless people want him dead. Could it be that those people are all bad people? In reality, in their eyes, it was you who protected Su Li all the way to the south that was the truly bad person. Chen Changsheng thought to himself, could it really be like this? We still have to first understand why Principal Shang sent you to the capital. Tang 36 said, "You must know that my grandfather once said that in this world, there are only 4.5 people that he truly fears. Your teacher is one of them." Chen Changsheng was very curious. "Who are the others?" Tang 36 replied, "The Empress, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets, and Black Robe." Chen Changsheng counted the most powerful figures of the continent and asked in confusion, "Then what about the Demon Lord?" Tang 36 replied, "The Demon Lord isn't a person. That half, who is it?" "Black Robe. Since he's serving the demons, he naturally can't be considered a human." Chen Changsheng caught the important point in these words and asked, "Does the Tang Old Master know of Black Robe's identity?" Tang 36 did not answer. Time gradually passed. The sun also gradually moved. The blue sky gradually turned red, the color of dusk filling the sky. In the sky behind the great banyan tree, one could already see that a smear of darkness was about to arrive. They stood on the shore of the lake, whispering about these matters that had no interest in them. Back then, in the Plum Garden Inn, Chen Changsheng and Tang 36 had truly met for the first time. At that time, they had subconsciously wanted to appear more mature, wanted to imitate adults in exchanging pleasantries and socializing, but they had seemed so clumsy, childish, and adorable. Now that they had finally come into contact with these things, they suddenly realized that they did not want to be mature. Because maturity often meant decay, meant complexity and exhaustion. Several dozen koi fish swished their tails in the lake. Because they had eaten their fill of steamed buns, they seemed rather weak. One of the fattest koi fish was actually slowly sinking into the mud at the bottom of the pond. The mood by the lake was rather heavy. The world has always been very large, and the hearts of people have always been very complex. When it's dark, it's better than the night. When it's boring, it's better than the Heavenly Tao Academy. Especially those old people who rule over this world. Their bodies exude an aura of dust. Tang 36 looked at him and said, "But those things are actually not important, because we are not those kinds of people." Chen Changsheng looked at his reflection in the lake, looked at his own face, and felt somewhat uneasy. He said, "Have you ever thought that in the future we might become those kinds of people that we loathe the most right now?" Tang 36 sneered. "That's each person's problem. Could it be that if we become a pile of shit, we still have the face to blame the world?" He continued, "You have to understand the kind of people we want to become, the kind of people our world will become." Chen Changsheng felt that these two words were far too reasonable. Before leaving Xuanyang City, Su Li had said a few things to him. Only now did he finally understand. He raised his head to Tang 36 and said, "Thank you." Given Tang 36's personality, he should have very indifferently replied with "There's no need to be polite," but for some reason, he did not. A cool and refreshing night wind blew over, slicing the golden waves on the lake into countless fragments. It was like he had returned to Xuanyang City. On the long street, amidst the torrential rain, there were cracks in space everywhere, and at the edges of these cracks was a dazzling light. A metal blade stood before the wind and rain, unshakable. "I want to become a person like Wang," he said. "I want to live like him." There's a second chapter. The time for the update has not been set.